This happened in Haneul's second year of high school. She and her friends watched an adult movie for the first time. The girl sat in numbness. She had never thought of such things before. Her classmate invited friends to a sleepover. The girls were looking for an interesting film among their older brother's DVDs and came across an interesting disc. Here's how it happened. For the girls, this video was a revelation. Half of what was happening they did not understand. For Haneul, it all seemed wrong. The girl looked at the whole process with horror. She was frightened by the size and how physiologically possible it was. But then she saw a scene with a very sensual kiss, and it imprinted itself on her memory forever. The girl thought she'd like to kiss her lover like that someday. Then she blushed, but kept looking at the picture through her fingers. It looked amazing. That's what she was thinking at the time. The girls were in a store and were choosing underwear. A friend held out a set and asked if they liked it. Haneul wondered if he was too frank, to which her friend replied that that was what made him attractive. She was going on a sleepover trip with her boyfriend, so she wanted to buy some nice lingerie because they would definitely do this. Haneul stared at her friend incomprehensibly and asked what she meant. Her friend looked at her and made an ambiguous gesture with her hands. Haneul froze while the girls continued to discuss the topic. The girl said that when she and her boyfriend held hands, she realized he had big hands, so she's looking forward to them doing this. Haneul asked the question, "What do hands have to do with this?" Her friend laughed and said that if a man has big hands, he also has a big device underneath. The girl blushed and was very embarrassed. It was the first time she had heard of such a thing. The girl began to reprimand Haneul for her ignorance in this area. She was not in a school for girls, but in a regular school full of guys. Another friend of theirs suddenly suggested going on a blind date. She has a friend from the physical education department who has a lot of good-looking guys. They asked her to come and bring her girlfriends. Haneul wondered if the guy her friend knew was as cute as Jae-hee-sun-bae. Her friend was outraged, said, "How can you compare someone to one of the two hottest guys at uni?" Haneul was surprised, asked who was the second handsome man. Her friend was shocked. How could one not know such things? It was Kim Min-cheol from the business management department. He was even more popular than Jae-hee-sun-bae. Her girlfriends said there were hundreds of comments on social media about him. Haneul knew the guy and couldn't believe it. On leaving the store, the girls continued to enthusiastically discuss Min-cheol, saying how tall and handsome he was. He looked like a celebrity. Haneul said she didn't think he was as beautiful as the others. She walked and talked about how he looked like a bully, but Jae-hee-sun-bae was nice. The girl didn't notice a male figure behind her. The young guy grabbed her cheeks and started pulling her, asking her why she was saying such bad things about him. The girl jumped away from him like a fire and started yelling at him, asking him why the hell he was here. While her girlfriends stood in bewilderment, the guy continued to tease the girl, ruffling her hair and asking when she became so bold as to say nasty things about him behind his back. The young men stood in the middle of the street arguing like little children. No one at the university knew the truth yet. These two have been childhood friends for 20 years. They were both in their 20s, and you could say they knew each other from birth because their moms were in the hospital at the same time. As luck would have it, it later turned out they lived not far from each other. This meant that from kindergarten through high school, the two were always together. And now they find themselves at the same university. Fate itself had brought them together time and time again. They often quarreled like cat and dog, but they had one hobby in common: PC games. So they spent a lot of time together. Even during games, they bickered like an old married couple. But once they had calmed down a bit, they were enthusiastic about spending time together again. At the end of the pair, the teacher gave an assignment to write a review of a movie released before the 90s, the volume of at least 5 pages before the next class. Haneul put her head on the desk and listened to the teacher with half an ear, so she missed the information about the assignment. She thought about the fact that she didn't have a boyfriend because Min-cheol was always hanging around, his formidable appearance scaring away all the guys around her. When she later saw the size of the assignment, she was desperate. She didn't know how to do it in a week. The girl was humming a song and thinking that now at university she would have a better chance of meeting a guy and falling in love because she and Min-cheol would spend less time together and see each other less often. Suddenly, one of her classmates called out to her and suggested we go out to eat together. The girl was very happy. The guy was cute and nice. The young people were already walking towards the restaurant when a familiar voice sounded behind them and called out to Haneul. Haneul stared at her friend incomprehensibly and asked what she meant. Ignoring her companion, he carried on the conversation in his usual manner and scolded the girl for not responding to his messages. The girl bristled, said he scared her, and asked why he was picking on her. The guy replied that she had been rude lately but offered to go out to dinner with her. Haneul was surprised, said she'd already made an appointment with someone else today. Min-cheol tensed and wondered who it was she was going to have dinner with. He looked at the frightened guy who was standing off to the side. The young man looked at Min-cheol and was drenched in sweat, unable to squeeze out a word. The guy leaned on Haneul and with a menacing look asked if they had to go to dinner together today. The frightened guy took the hint. The girl watched in despair at how quickly her classmate ran away. He wished them a good evening and hurried out of sight. Haneul was furious, gritting her teeth in anger. Min-cheol stood behind her and smiled, satisfied that he had sent the loser away. Suddenly, the girl turned around and kicked the guy with all her might, started screaming that she wasn't going to have dinner with him. She accused him of being the reason she had no friends or boyfriend. The guy got angry, started yelling that he was worried about her, wanted to have dinner together since he knew she had no friends. They stood in the middle of the street arguing for a while longer. In the end, they sent each other away and Min-cheol left. Despite the quarrel, each of them knew that the next time they met, it would be business as usual. Such was their friendship. Haneul stood and continued to make obscene gestures to his back. She was so engrossed, she didn't notice someone sneaking up on her and scaring her. Jae-hee-sunbae laughed, said that a girl is always funny scared. Haneul tried to calm her pounding heart. The guy asked what the girl was so upset about, and she replied that they were given a very difficult assignment today. He said he knew what she was talking about. They had written a movie review last year, too. Haneul was surprised, asked how he'd guessed. The guy answered that this task is given every year to the first-year students. Last year, he also had a hard time. He had to try hard to get a good mark. The girl got discouraged and said she didn't even know which movie to choose. Suddenly, Jae-hee-sunbae said that he had some flash drives with suitable movies left and could give them to her. The girl couldn't believe her luck, thinking how lucky she was to meet him today. The guy offered to go to his house tonight so she wouldn't waste any time. The girl thought that luck had smiled on her. She would not only get movies for the assignment, but also visit his apartment. Finding herself on the doorstep of Jae-hee-sunbae's house, the girl became numb. She didn't expect what was waiting for her inside. There was chaos and filth all around. She didn't expect such a nice guy to be so messy. He asked her to come and sit down while he looked for flash drives. The girl started to feel nauseous. She didn't know where to sit down. She couldn't imagine how anyone could live in such conditions. While Haneul stood frozen, the guy called her over and told her to sit down. He didn't remember where he put the flash drives. The girl sat down with horror on a small piece of floor where there was no junk lying around and waited. Jae-hee-sunbae finally announced that he had found the flash drives. He apologized for taking so long to find them and offered the girl a juice. The guy handed her a mug. Haneul noticed his hands. They were quite large. Suddenly, she remembered what her girlfriend had told her about the size of his hands matching the size of his thing. The girl instantly blushed. The guy asked if she was all right, to which the girl replied that she was fine. She complimented him, said he had big hands. She clutched the cup in her palms and didn't know where to hide her burning face. The guy hesitated and thanked her. It was a little strange. As for a man, he thought he had normal hands. Suddenly, he raised his palm and smilingly said that his ring finger was bigger than his index finger. Haneul sat in bewilderment. She didn't quite understand why he had said that. The guy moved closer to her. He was too close to her face. The girl felt uncomfortable. She jumped up on the spot and said it was getting late and she had to leave. She took the thumb drives, thanked the guy, and wishing him a good evening, hurriedly left. The young man was surprised at the sudden change of mood and remained seated in bewilderment as he did so. The girl walked down the street in suspense. She was tense because of the strange atmosphere she and Jae-hee Sunbae were in. She walked and wondered what the hell he was talking about his fingers. Maybe it was a secret language of guys and what it was supposed to mean. She decided she'd go and ask Min-cheol. Haneul broke into the guy's room without warning, complaining why he wasn't answering her. She didn't have time to say anything as she witnessed a strange scene. Min-cheol sat on a chair with his pants down. Both were stunned to see each other. There were sounds of moans and sighs in the room. The girl's gaze lowered down, and she saw what the guy was clutching tightly in his hands. Thus, the girl was clearly convinced that the theory about big hands was true, because what she saw was really huge. Haneul was shocked, trying to reassure herself that she had found a new reason to make fun of Min-cheol, if not for one thing. If only she hadn't seen her photo open on the computer screen. There was an awkward pause in the room. Haneul wished her friend the best of luck and rushed to run away. He shouted at her to stop, that she had misunderstood everything. Min-cheol was shocked. He felt humiliated, but he wanted to explain himself and asked the girl to listen to him. The girl thought that he was, of course, the kind of guy who might forget to lock his door since he lived alone, but he definitely wouldn't use a photo of his friend for something like this. Min-cheol had come home 20 minutes ago and was angry at Haneul for her words. He was about to sit down to play games when he got a notification on his phone. He got a message from a friend for Min-cheol to check his email. He sent him a cool video. The guy sat down at the computer and thought that if there was a video of a girl with enticing curves, he would definitely enjoy it. In reality, it turned out to be a clip from a rather intriguing video. The guy liked it and began watching with keen interest. Min-cheol got up precisely and tried to lock the door, but it was broken. The guy thought no one would break in. He sat down at the computer, leaned back in his chair, and decided to relax. The guy was enjoying the process just as his chat room was bursting with notifications. It was distracting and annoying him. Haneul was sending him a bunch of messages. He decided to mute the chat so he wouldn't be disturbed by anything. Suddenly, he noticed she'd changed her profile picture, zoomed in to see. The guy thought that she looked strange and was wearing something strange. The sounds of moaning from the video drew the guy's attention back. He didn't notice how he continued his activity with the open profile picture of his friend. He just forgot to close it. Min-cheol was gibbering in a panic, trying to tell Haneul how it really was. The girl was in mixed feelings. She didn't feel like figuring things out with him right now. She mumbled that it was time to go home, thanked him for talking to her, and wanted to leave. She'd already opened the door, said they'd talk later when the guy called out to her again. Haneul looked at him furtively, wondering what he was going to tell her. She really felt embarrassed that she had interrupted him and found out such personal things. Min-cheol looked at her with eyes full of tears and sincerely claimed that he wasn't lying to her, that everything he said was true. He asked her why she didn't believe him. The girl didn't answer anything and just left his room and his house. She stood outside in utter confusion, not knowing what to do. She wanted to believe him, but what she had seen had shaken her deeply. Haneul grabbed her head and thought about how she had brought her friend to tears. How could this happen? The weekend flew by. The girl sat in the classroom and thought about the fact that Min-cheol had never contacted her after what had happened at his house. But on the other hand, it was expected. Suddenly, she remembered him crying in front of her. He must have been sincere, because Haneul hadn't remembered him crying since elementary school. She was pulled out of her thoughts by her friend's voice. She clapped her hands in front of her face. The girl asked Haneul why she was still sitting in the classroom since everyone had already left. The girl didn't know what to answer. She hadn't talked to anyone this weekend, but she was really sick and wanted to hear her girlfriend's opinion on how she should be with Min-cheol now. Haneul decided that she would try to tell her without too much detail. She began to talk about the situation of her imaginary girlfriend. Min-cheol lay in his friend's dorm room. His friend was worried that he had spent the whole weekend at his place and that he might be evicted from the dormitory if they found out that he had let a stranger in. A friend asked Min-cheol why he didn't hang out with that girl from the media department, since he usually went to see her every day. The guy began to twist around on the bed. He felt uncomfortable at the mention of Haneul. With resentment, he closed his eyes and mumbled about how he should have propped something on the door or not given the girl the password for his front door at all. Then he thought that if it weren't for the video his friend had sent him, none of this would have happened. So Min-cheol jumped out of bed, grabbed his friend, and started torturing him. Oddly enough, he felt better, let go of his friend, and sat back on the bed. Min-cheol picked up his phone and opened Haneul's profile. He started licking through her photos and came across a picture of them together. In fact, their friendship was very important to him. Even though they often argued, she was dear to him. The guy put his head down on his hand and began to think about what he should do in this situation. He remembered the look on her face as she ran out of his house. At that time, Haneul was sitting outside with her friend and tried to explain to her the situation of her fictitious friend. To make sure she got it right, the girl repeated Haneul's story that guy number 1 had said something ambiguous to her friend, so she went to guy number 2's house to find out what it meant, but caught him in a compromising situation. The girl thought to herself that Haneul was a terrible liar. Guy number 2 was definitely Min-cheol, but who was guy number 1? She asked her girlfriend what she had seen. Was he naked? Haneul replied that he was almost naked. The girl nodded her head and said that she was very stupid. She could have just gone online and Googled what guy number 1 meant by that. Haneul was shocked. How stupid she had been. Why hadn't she thought to look on the internet in the first place? The girl was depressed, not paying attention that with her appearance she made it clear to her friend that this whole story was about her. Minji said she knows that Haneul and Min-cheol have been good friends for a long time, and if one of them makes the first move, they will make up and everything will be like before. Haneul thought the girl was right. And since Min-cheol had been sincere with her and she had run away so rudely, she felt she could be the first to approach him. Minji was glad to help her friend, deciding to pretend she hadn't noticed how they went from her fictional friend's problems to real ones. Suddenly, the girl saw Min-cheol walking by. She told Haneul it was about time she made up with him. The girl jumped up from her seat, thanked her, and told her they would meet later. She ran toward Min-cheol. Haneul ran down the street. Her heart was beating out of her chest, thinking that she was wrong to run away from him. Min-cheol was so sincere with her that he even cried. It would probably be hard for him to make the first move. She thought she'd catch up with him, apologize for the misunderstanding, and they'd be close friends again. The classroom was empty. The girl was in her underwear. Her knee was between the guy's legs, and she could feel something hard there. Min-cheol lay on the floor while Haneul sat riding him. Both were breathing heavily and looking at each other in surprise. Haneul ran across campus to catch up with Min-cheol. The girl started calling his name. When the guy turned around, he was scared, thinking, what does this crazy girl want from him? Min-cheol began to run away from her. The girl shouted at him and asked him why he was running away, and he asked her why she was chasing him. She said she needed to talk to him and started running even faster. Min-cheol felt uneasy. He didn't know what she wanted from him, but he didn't think it was anything good. Haneul ran and didn't notice anything around her, kept asking him to stop. Suddenly, she crashed into a guy walking towards her. He was looking at his phone and didn't notice the girl either. Min-cheol turned around and froze. The girl stood all wet and sticky. When she bumped into the guy, his sweet drink poured out on her. Now her entire t-shirt was showing through. The young people began apologizing to each other. The guy was worried about her ruined t-shirt. While Haneul apologized to him for bumping into him, the guy couldn't take his eyes off her soaked shirt. He offered to exchange phone numbers so he could reimburse her later for the t-shirt. The girl liked the idea. She wanted to buy him a new drink. Unexpectedly, Kim Min-cheol appeared and covered her breasts with his bag, handing it to her. He grabbed her arm and dragged her behind him without letting her continue her conversation with the other guy. He said he would take her to their club room to change. Finally, Min-cheol cast a threatening glance at the guy who stood in bewilderment and never managed to get the girl's number. The clubroom was empty, classes were already over, and no one was supposed to come in here. Haneul asked why the guy had brought her here, to which Min-cheol asked if she was going to walk to the dorm like that. The girl hesitated and said she could have covered herself with his bag. The guy replied that he would give her one of their team jerseys, since hers was hopelessly ruined. Haneul apologized for the inconvenience. Min-cheol froze for a moment and then continued to look for t-shirts, saying it was okay. The girl looked around herself and decided she really needed to change. She was all sticky, her underwear was completely visible. She remembered all those times when she had unashamedly undressed in front of Min-cheol and decided that it wouldn't be a big deal if she took off her shirt in front of him. Haneul had already taken off her t-shirt when she suddenly thought she had to warn him so it wouldn't be awkward. She turned to the guy, told him not to look at her until she put on another t-shirt. At that moment, the office door opened and Min-cheol's classmate walked in. Min-cheol turned around in horror to his classmate's voice. The one had already gone inside and said hello. He thought about how it would look if he noticed a half-naked Haneul. The girl was terrified and huddled against the wall, wondering what the hell was happening to her and where she was going to go now. Min-cheol headed swiftly toward his friend. He was just about to ask him to go for a drink together. The guy put his arm around his classmate's shoulders, preventing him from going any further, and told them to go on without him today. He glared at his friend and tried to chase him away. The young man asked Min-cheol to let him go so he could leave his things in the classroom. The guy gave him a creepy look and said he'd do it for him. Cold sweat ran down Min-cheol's back. He hoped his classmate would leave as soon as possible. The guy had to give up. He gave Min-cheol his things and left. Min-cheol looked out of the classroom and made sure no one was around. He went inside and locked it with the key. The young man exhaled a sigh of relief. Thought he and Haneul had been on the verge of tragedy. He called the girl's name and went over to her, but it was empty. The guy looked around, but the girl was nowhere to be found. He didn't understand where she had gone. Suddenly, the locker door swung open and he saw Haneul sitting in it with a disgruntled face. Min-cheol asked her why she was sitting in the locker, to which the girl replied that she couldn't get out because she was stuck. She was very embarrassed and ashamed to say it. The guy burst out laughing so hard he even cried. He wiped his eyes and said he'd been telling her to play sports for a long time, called her a piglet. Haneul sat in locker with her legs pressed to her chest and her head down. She thought she might look pathetic at the moment. Min-cheol didn't want to embarrass her, so he covered his eyes. The girl screamed for him to help her out. The guy grabbed her hands and started pulling her towards him, teasing her and telling her to try harder. Suddenly, the girl jumped out of the locker like a cork. She even got excited until she realized that she was flying straight at Min-cheol. The young people fell straight to the floor. Haneul found herself riding the guy, who froze in surprise. Min-cheol thought he might as well go blind. The girl froze and thought about how it looked from the outside, since she was half naked on top of the guy. Suddenly, they heard someone tugging on the doorknob. Haneul was covered with goosebumps of terror. It was Min-cheol's classmate who came back. He stood at the door and didn't understand why the guy had locked himself in the classroom. The girl ducked in horror and didn't even notice how she pressed her breasts against the guy's face. She pressed her breasts against his nose and he found it hard to breathe. Haneul didn't even notice that the guy was barely moving beneath her. She listened in horror to the knocks and requests to open the door. She thought about how to get out of this critical situation. Min-cheol, on the other hand, tried to tell her to move her breasts away from his face, but the air was disastrously short. His eyes were full of anger. Suddenly, he felt strange. He realized that Haneul was sitting on top of him with her leg between his legs, and he had his face against her breasts. His body reacted treacherously to the looming picture in his head. He'd asked his buddy not to react this way, but his male instincts were stronger. The noise outside the door stopped, and Haneul finally lifted from his face. But he was astonished at the sight of a beautiful, half-naked girl. Min-cheol mentally transported himself back to his middle school days. The guys were sitting in class and teasing each other as usual when suddenly their classmate asked if they were really not dating. Both replied that they don't see each other as the opposite sex. They were good friends, and that's it. Their friend looked at them doubtfully and said they shouldn't be so adamant. Asked Min-cheol what would happen if one day he looked at Haneul as a girl. The guy smirked smugly and said that if the day came, he'd cut both of his balls off. Haneul eyed the guy suspiciously. Surely he couldn't think of anything smarter than that. She said if she ever fell in love with him, she'd shave her head. Min-cheol started teasing the girl, saying that he put his balls on the line and she bet on a haircut. He asked if she was hesitant and afraid she might fall in love with him. Haneul endured until she exploded and started pounding him. The girl screamed that he pissed her off and that this was the only feeling she would have for him. Min-cheol tried to shout to the girl and bring her out of her trance. He reached down with both hands and tried to lift her breasts from his face. Haneul suddenly noticed how beautiful and firm his abs were. His face flushed. He looked very attractive. The guy said that he locked the door so that she wouldn't be afraid that someone would come in. He lay there in embarrassment. He wanted her to get off him quickly. Haneul remembered that he had blushed the same way the last time he had explained himself to her. She caught herself thinking that she liked that look of his. The guy kept pushing her away, saying he was having a hard time breathing. The girl realized she had continued to sit on top of him and apologized. Min-cheol said not to make up anything and apologized for not having another choice. Only then did the girl realize how it all looked from the outside. Haneul blushed at the realization, tried to get up as quickly as possible. The girl backed up so sharply that she lost her balance and fell, hitting the closet. Books flew down on top of her. Min-cheol got up and said she was crazy, jumped on him, and almost strangled him with her breasts. He threw a t-shirt at her and told her to get dressed quickly and to stop her exhibitionist antics. While Haneul was getting dressed, the guy was glad he'd managed to keep his dignity. He couldn't believe that she had turned him on. That stupid Haneul. Min-cheol thought that she was too careless. Even in front of him, she shouldn't undress so easily. The girl pulled on a t-shirt and turned to the guy. He stood with his arms crossed and looked at her without interest. Haneul apologized for running away from him last time. She was wrong. That's why she ran after him. She wanted to tell him that. Min-cheol looked at her in bewilderment. He wondered how to communicate with her. He didn't expect her to be the first to talk about what had happened. The girl started patting him on the back, smiling and saying that now all her muscles would be sore because of him. She offered to forget everything and be friends like before, said she was leaving and said goodbye. Min-cheol wondered if things would really go back to the way they were. Haneul was doing her animation homework with Minji. Both girls were already tired, even though there was still a lot of work to do. Not far away sat a couple of their classmates. Everyone sighed heavily because in addition to the review, they had to complete an animation assignment. The girl was desperate, saying that Haneul was lucky she could draw beautifully. The girl replied that she has to draw on paper because she doesn't know how to use 3D drawing programs. She was having an extremely hard time concentrating today. Recent events had thrown her off balance. She tried to remember how to draw individual body parts as suddenly the image of a heated Min-cheol surfaced in her mind, his burning eyes and strong hands. Haneul blushed instantly. The sudden rush of feelings frightened her. She jumped up from her seat and said she had to get out of the classroom right away, and then she stormed out. Once in the WC, the girl washed her face with cool water. But the image of Min-cheol still did not leave her head. She felt aroused and scolded herself for it. She couldn't believe that she could like that jerk. The girl waved her hands in despair as if dispelling the image of the guy. She couldn't believe she was so impressed with his muscles. Haneul thought it was because she didn't have a boyfriend. He was the only man around. So she was so impressed. Meanwhile, Min-cheol was at home and lying on his bed. He thought about what had happened in class today. The image of Haneul's breasts wouldn't leave his mind. She was warm and soft and seductive. The guy pressed his palms over his eyes. He was thinking about the wrong thing at all. He wondered if he had lost his mind and why his body reacted like that. He wasn't used to feeling this kind of emotion around Lee Haneul. Min-cheol reassured himself that it was a normal reaction of the male body to the sight of breasts. It was about physiology, not the girl herself. Then the guy wondered if she had always had such large breasts. He definitely liked her. He scolded himself for such thoughts and began to spin around the bed, chasing away the obsession. Min-cheol was curious as to what the girl was doing now. And at this time, Haneul decided and called a friend, asked to take her with her on a blind date. Min-cheol lay contemplating calling Haneul to dine together tomorrow. Haneul asked Minji to help her get ready for a blind date. The girl was surprised why she decided to accept, since she wasn't interested when Sehui suggested it. Minji asked the girl to look up so she could put on her eyelashes. Haneul explained that since entering the university, she has only been going to classes and doing homework. She just wanted to make new acquaintances. The girl agreed with her, saying it would be good for her. Minji sent the girl to change her clothes so she could do her styling afterward. The girl came out and asked her friend how she looked, to which she said without looking not to spend too much energy on a blind first date. Then she threw her a look. Haneul looked awful. She had no sense of proportion or style. Minji offered to pick out some of her clothes for her. She smirked and started to change friends' clothes. Sehui and her girlfriend stood in admiration when they met Haneul. The girl looked very cute and classy. They showered her with compliments. Girls asked why she didn't walk like that all the time, then all the guys would be at her feet. They said the guys were waiting for them, so they had to go. Suddenly, Haneul's phone rang. It was Min-cheol. The girl thought he might want something from her. She was pondering whether to answer him now when the girls called out to her, and she decided she would talk to him later. The girls walked into the cafe and waved cheerfully to the guys, apologizing for being a bit late. The guys got up to greet them, all looking friendly and cute. The girls joked that the guys from the PE department should be proud to meet the girls from the media department. Sehui thought how handsome they all were. Haneul went in last and said hello to all the guys. Guys were immediately blown away by her beauty, thought she was super cute. One of the guys suggested to sit down, and since they are all of the same age, not to be embarrassed and to communicate informally. A guy who introduced himself as Cheol Bong-gu offered a drink. Haneul was about to have a drink when he said that first she should clink glasses with everyone and then drink. Since the girl had never had a drink before, she didn't know about it. The company was having fun and drinking, and Haneul felt uncomfortable. She thought it was difficult for her to talk so freely with strangers. An hour later, the girl was completely drunk. She really liked soju, but since she hadn't drunk it before, she didn't know it was very strong, so she got intoxicated quickly. Suddenly, one of the guys handed her a glass of water, said if she overdid it, she would be very sick in the morning. The girl thought it was very cute. Haneul remembered that the guy's name was Seong-hyun, thanked him, and thought he was really cute. Suddenly, Cheol Bong-gu suggested she play a game. She knew about this alcoholic game, but had never tried the game. Since they had a lot of bottle caps, they decided to play. Drunken Haneul challenged and said she could handle this game in one fell swoop. Seong-hyun leaned over to the girl and whispered in her ear how best to hit the lid for her to get it right. Haneul hit the lid and it whistled past the guy's ear. He sat there in shock, thinking about the fact that he was barely in one piece. Haneul was happy to win, turned to the guy and clapped his hands, said it was all thanks to his clue. Seong-hyun suddenly asked Haneul if he could ask her a personal question. He asked why she went on a blind date if she had a boyfriend. The girl was surprised, asked why he thought so. Guy answered that in university there is a popular guy who is all the time walks with her, asked, "Is not they meet?" Haneul freaked out, and the guy went on to say that part of the reason many people know about the girl is because of this guy, because they are often seen together. The girl thought that she was right. She didn't have a boyfriend because Min-cheol was always hanging around her. One of the girls laughed and said that Haneul and Min-cheol were childhood friends. Haneul replied that there was no romance between them. They are very close because they have been friends since birth. They don't even have secrets between them. Saying that, the girl suddenly remembered how she had caught Min-cheol in the process of self-satisfaction. There were really no secrets between them now. She was horrified to think why she kept bringing it up again and again. Suddenly, Haneul began to notice anything in the environment that was associated with what Min-cheol was doing. At a nearby table, a guy was shaking a bottle of red pepper paste. Haneul's mind obligingly planted a recent image in her mind. At another table, a young man shook the pepper shaker to pepper the dish. It felt like the universe was mocking the girl. Haneul grabbed a bottle of soju and started drinking from her throat, determined to drink herself into a drunken stupor. The girl dropped her head on the table. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out and read the messages from Min-cheol. He was offering her dinner after he finished work. Haneul stared at her phone and thought about the fact that the guy was acting normal, and she had dragged herself on a blind date and got drunk to forget about everything. Resentment flooded her. Her thoughts were interrupted by Seong-hyun, who asked if she was okay, if she had a headache. The guy said the rest of the guys went out for some fresh air and to buy hangover cures. He asked if she had a lump on her forehead. The young man put his hand on her shoulder and offered to examine her. Haneul lay with a glazed look and little understanding. The guy's face was too close to hers and kept coming closer. The girl tried to gather her thoughts to understand what was going on. Suddenly, the table shook from the impact. The girl turned her head with difficulty and thought she was hallucinating. Kim Min-cheol stood in front of her, clearly unhappy with what was happening. He said he'd brought their beer and glared menacingly at her. The girl thought about how handsome he was. A group of friends came back and were having fun discussing how good the fresh air was. One of the girls said they should have brought Haneul with them, because she was obviously drunk. Suddenly, they noticed someone standing at their table. As they came closer, they recognized Min-cheol. At this point, Haneul couldn't tell if it was a hallucination or if she had really seen Min-cheol. Not only that, she said out loud that he was handsome. She decided she'd better pass out again and dropped her head on the table. Suddenly, she felt something warm and soft under her cheek. It was Min-cheol's palm. The girl stared at him in surprise. The guy asked interestedly why she was banging her head against the table, if she was okay, and if she was drunk. Friends stood and carefully watched what was happening. When Min-cheol asked how much she drank, the girls hesitantly replied that it seemed to be a bottle of soju. The guy was shocked because the girl had never drunk anything stronger than beer before, and then she suffered from a hangover afterwards. He started reprimanding the girl for such reckless behavior, said she would feel very bad. Haneul started to resent him for telling her off like her mom. Min-cheol was looking for something in his apron. The girl kept muttering until something hard and cold hit her forehead. She yelped. The guy told her to drink it and never drink alcohol again. Then he said he had to get back to work. As soon as he left, the whole company started discussing him. Everyone was excited about his looks, saying how cool he was. Haneul was tense about it. Suddenly, the girl said she needed to go outside for some fresh air. Seung-hyun looked closely after her. Once outside, Haneul called out loudly to the guy. She was very angry with him. Min-cheol was throwing out the trash at this time and turned as if nothing had happened to his friend's voice. The girl noticed that he had something white sticking out of his mouth and asked why he didn't tell her that he was smoking. The guy replied that it was a chupa chups and she needed to sober up. This made her even angrier, and she asked why he didn't tell her he worked at that place. Min-cheol replied that he told her about it. The guy grinned cheerfully and asked cockily if she was ashamed that he caught her flirting with another guy. While Haneul's anger boiled over, Min-cheol continued to tease her. He said that to go on a date with a girl like her, they'd have to be very pretentious, so he'll pretend he didn't see anything. The girl interrupted him by handing him the water jar back. She said she didn't want anything for which money hadn't paid. The guy got offended, asked if she thought he stole it. Haneul felt bad about accusing her friend of stealing. Suddenly, Min-cheol held out his hand and demanded his drink back, said he changed his mind about giving it to her. The guy pouted and said he was worried about her, called her and she ignored him, got drunk and thought he was a thief. In that case, she wasn't worthy of getting help from him. Haneul pouted in response too. She knew she was wrong and didn't want to fight with him. The girl opened the can and quickly drank all of the contents. Suddenly, Min-cheol approached her and was surprised to notice that the girl had done her makeup. The girl felt uncomfortable that he was staring at her so intently, so she said that Minji had helped her put on her makeup. The guy scrutinized her and then said that you could never make a silk purse out of a cow's ear. Such rudeness hurt Haneul. She told the guy to look at himself first. Min-cheol replied that unlike her, he had always been a silk purse. The girl thought to herself that it was hard to argue with that. He was really damn handsome. She told him to be a nice purse and cracked him with all her might. At this time, the young men in the company continued to discuss Min-cheol. The girl couldn't stop saying that he looked like a handsome celebrity. Seung-hyun listened to his friend's conversation attentively. Cheol Bong-gu suddenly remembered that there was another handsome guy at the university. The girl replied that it was Jae-hee Sunbae. He was a senior student in their faculty. The guy didn't even believe it and said he would like to be friends with him. Seung-hyun said he knew him. The girl was surprised, asked how he knew him. The guy replied that he was a close friend of his brother. He said there were a lot of rumors about Jae-hee Sunbae at one time. The girls immediately perked up and asked him to tell them all about it. Min-cheol checked his phone and said his break was over. Haneul was surprised that they stood outside for a whole 15 minutes. The guy replied that he hadn't noticed how much time had passed during their conversation. Both of them were comfortable around each other. Suddenly, Min-cheol asked the girl if she liked any of the guys they came with. Haneul immediately bristled, glared menacingly at the guy, and asked if, even so, what did he care? The guy replied that if she was attracted to someone, it would probably be her first boyfriend. Then he would have to see if it was a good match. The girl immediately started getting cranky and slapping him on the back. She told him not to do anything strange. Min-cheol laughed gleefully. He enjoyed fooling around with her. He gave her a friendly pat on the head and said he really should get back to work. Min-cheol smiling again and shouted that if she got a boyfriend, her appa would definitely check him out. Haneul deep down was pleased with his concern, but she gave him the usual sassy middle finger and told him to go away. Returning, the girl thought about the fact that it had been a long time since they'd had such a good time with him. She felt comfortable with him and was glad she'd come on this blind date. Suddenly, the girl saw Sung-hyun and stopped. The guy said she hadn't been back in a long time and he was starting to worry about her. He smiled and asked if they could talk alone for a while. At this time, the friends were sitting around discussing what Sung-hyun had told them about Jae-hee Sunbae. They couldn't believe that what they had heard was true. Although appearances can be deceiving, it was hard to believe that Jae-hee Sunbae liked taking girls to motels. Such rumors were too scandalous and ridiculous. Night has fallen on the city. It's time for motel addicts. In one of the rooms, a young couple was having fun. Jae-hee Sunbae stared at the ceiling, completely oblivious to the girl riding on top of him. The girl got tired of this and she bent down to him with complaints, began to ask what was wrong with him and why didn't he focus on what they were doing. The young girl indignantly asked why he was so distant when he was the one who insisted on meeting today. The guy replied that it wasn't that. He was just trying hard to remember what he'd forgotten. Suddenly, Jae-hee Sunbae stood up abruptly and said that he had to do his homework because he had to turn it in tomorrow. He headed for the exit, pulling on his pants. The girl was furious and hurt, shouting in his wake how he could just leave like that. The guy went home as if nothing had happened. After getting home, the guy immediately sat down at the computer. He was going to do his homework because the deadline expired in a few hours. He started going through the flash drives and noticed the one that Haneul was supposed to pick up. Jae-hee Sunbae was surprised. He revisited the flash drives once more and realized that the movie's flash drive was indeed still in his possession. He smiled and wondered what was on the flash drive that Haneul had taken then. Seung-hyun asked the girl if she was cold, to which she replied that she was fine. They were chatting nicely, and suddenly the guy said that from the outside you can see that Haneul and Min-cheol are very close. The girl felt a little embarrassed. She knew it would scare off a lot of guys, but replied that they were childhood friends. The guy asked if there were any romantic feelings between them, which made Haneul even more uncomfortable. She immediately protested, saying that Min-cheol was like a brother to her. Sung-hyun was embarrassed and said that they looked like a couple from the outside. The girl said that if she had a boyfriend, she wouldn't have gone on a date tonight. Then Sung-hyun got excited, said he was happy to hear that, and admitted that he liked Haneul. Such a frank confession surprised the girl and took her by surprise. She stared at the guy, not knowing what to say, because they had just met each other. The guy, meanwhile, smiled and offered her to be his girlfriend. Min-cheol, who stood behind the wall and happened to witness this, had protesting feelings. He should be happy for his friend, but instead he felt bitterness. The next morning, the bus stop was deserted, with only 2 lone figures visible. Minji saw Min-cheol and said hello. He asked if she was going to visit her parents like him, to which the girl answered in the affirmative and asked why he was going without Haneul. The guy exhaled thoughtfully and replied that she was most likely spending time with her boyfriend right now. Minji yelled so loud that the guy was almost deaf. She started asking him who the guy was, where he was from, and when her friends started dating him. Min-cheol replied that he didn't know the details, saying he found out about it by accident. The girl grabbed her phone and started texting Haneul. She said that if her friend didn't answer her, she was probably with a guy. The university cat Donut walked by, and Min-cheol began to pet him. The girl glanced at Guy and realized that he looked like he was trying to suppress his emotions. Minji asked him how he felt about it. The guy stared at her in bewilderment. Then the girl said that he used to drive all the guys away from Haneul and act like a total jerk. What's different now? Min-cheol was outraged, said he was just protecting the girl from assholes. Minji asked if there was a guy he approved of. The guy sighed heavily and answered in the negative. He remembered how the girl shouted that she had no friends or boyfriend because of him and he felt guilty. He told the girl that Haneul was an adult and could make her own decisions. However, then his look turned serious and intimidating, and the guy said that if this so-called boyfriend of hers did something stupid, he would teach him a lesson. At that moment, Haneul stared at the cutest creature she had ever seen. It was Seunghyun's hamster. A girl came to visit a guy and ogled his pet while the guy prepared treats. Haneul was thinking about how she didn't know how to behave with a guy. They decided to try dating, but she thought it was too early to call them a couple. Rather, she wanted to get to know him better. She was worried about her appearance, since Minji wasn't in the dormitory to help her get ready. She thought that even if they met a couple of times and it didn't work out, she would still be glad to have the experience. Haneul took the laptop since they decided to do homework together. The girl got ready to look for a suitable movie. Seung-hyun handed her a soda and said he didn't know much about it but would look into it with her and try to help. The girl was very glad that he was interested in what she liked, trying to help, even though he was studying at another faculty. She thought he was a good person. When the guy sat down next to her, she felt embarrassed. Their shoulders were almost touching. The girl had never been so close to a guy alone together before. She began frantically selecting a movie by title, pressed play, and added the sound. In the next moment, an adult film started playing on the screen. This was definitely not what the girl had expected. Haneul turned white with horror and became numb. Seung-hyun was shocked and blushed, not expecting to see such a thing on a girl's computer. The girl closed the laptop lid lightning fast. She blushed and, without raising her head, said that movie masterpieces come in many genres, but she wasn't going to include such a thing. The guy replied that he understood and told her not to worry about it. Haneul thought about the fact that she had probably grabbed the wrong flash drive in a hurry. She recognized this movie because it was the one she had accidentally watched with her friends in high school. The girl thought how unlucky she was that on her first try she ended up with a film like this. She suggested to try to play another file and started looking, but all the files had a strange name. After she pressed play, another video of the same genre started playing on the screen. The girl almost threw her laptop out of shame. Haneul finally realized that she had grabbed the wrong flash drive by mistake. Apparently, this one contained Jae-hee Sunbae's personal collection of adult films. She immediately pulled it out, intending to put it away as far as possible. The girl experienced a sense of déjà vu. She thought with annoyance why she had been learning intimate details of guys she knew lately. She turned sharply to apologize to the guy, but stopped talking at half a word. Seung-hyun was very close to her and looking straight at her. Haneul thought, when did he have time to sit so close to her? She felt awkward and a little scared. At the same time, the guy's face kept coming closer to hers. Suddenly, the guy ducked forward to kiss her. Haneul managed to cover his mouth with her palms and thwart him. She stared at the guy and asked anxiously why he was doing this. Seung-hyun replied that he thought this was the right moment for a kiss. The girl got nervous and said that they weren't even dating, but he was already counting on it. Haneul felt uncomfortable. They had only known each other for 2 days, and he already wanted to kiss her. She wondered if he thought she was easy, or she was such a prude. Either way, she wasn't ready for something like this. She grabbed her bag, apologized to the guy, and said she had to leave right away. The girl was already walking down the street when she heard Seung-hyun calling her to stop. He grabbed her arm sharply and apologized for scaring her with his assertiveness. This puzzled the girl even more. The guy tried to convince the girl that it is now fashionable among young people to start with physical contact and then decide to build a relationship or not. Before dating, you need to understand whether a person is suitable for you in different ways. Haneul replied that such a thing was not for her, to which the guy squeezed her hand even tighter and said that it was only a kiss. She had nothing to be so afraid of. The girl screamed and asked him to let go of her hand. She was in pain. In the background, some couple was also arguing quite emotionally. Suddenly, there was the sound of a loud slap. The young people turned to look at the source of the sound, even distracted from their problem. Haneul froze in horror. She knew the guy who'd just been slapped in the face. She shouted out his name. Jae-hee Sunbae stood rubbing his cheek. The guy immediately smiled cheerfully and greeted her, saying it was good to see her again. Jae-hee Sunbae approached the couple and said that she had never seen Haneul outside of the university before. Seung-hyun was surprised to see the guy, and even more surprised that he and the girl knew each other. Jae-hee Sunbae wondered what the girl was doing so late at this place. He didn't even say hello to the guy standing across from him. Seung-hyun didn't like that his presence was ignored. He smiled strainedly and asked the guy to leave and let him talk to his girlfriend alone. He continued to clutch her wrist tightly. Haneul began to resent that she wasn't his girlfriend and again demanded that he let her go. The guy loomed menacingly over her and muttered through his teeth that they had started dating officially yesterday. The girl stared at him in horror, unable to understand how such a nice guy had suddenly changed and threatened her. Suddenly, Jae-hee Sunbae held his hand between them and forced the guy to let go of Haneul. He said that no matter who these two are to each other, the guy has no right to use physical force on the girl. He asked Haneul if she was dating this guy, to which the girl shook her head in the negative. Then Jae-hee Sunbae told the guy to leave her alone. Seung-hyun was getting nervous, angry that someone was meddling in their affairs. He asked who this guy was to Haneul. Jae-hee brightened up and replied that he was her Sunbae. He asked the guy to be quiet because it wasn't too late, and there were many students from their university living in the neighborhood. He asked if he'd like it if there were any rumors about him. Seung-hyun smirked and gloatingly replied that there would rather be rumors about Jae-hee getting slapped by a girl. Before he could say anything else, Jae-hee Sunbae pointed his finger in the direction and shouted that someone was watching them. The guy immediately turned to look. Turning back around, the guy realized he'd been played. Haneul and her friend had escaped. Jae-hee Sunbae was running so fast that he had to drag the girl by the hand. He turned to ask how the girl was feeling and only now noticed what a terrible state she was in. Haneul could barely walk and gasped for breath. The guy came closer, wanted to help. The girl said she had poor physical fitness and felt she might vomit. The pungent scent of the guy's perfume made her feel even worse. She couldn't stand it and threw up right on top of him. The young people went to the laundry room. Haneul felt so miserable that she was afraid to even open her eyes. The girl didn't understand why these things were happening to her. She felt ashamed of herself. Jae-hee Sunbae, shirtless, with his perfect smile and equally perfect figure, asked how the girl was feeling. Haneul blushed and stiffened at the sight of him half naked. She could only think of how hot he was. The girl turned away and began to lament that she was very sorry about what had happened, said that he was too kind to her, and she did not deserve it. The guy started to calm her down, said it was his fault she was sick because he made her run away. The girl thought he was really kind, like an angel. The guy laughed and joked that he'd never stripped in a laundromat before. But Haneul still continued to lament. She apologized a lot and said she would pay for the moral damage. Although the guy tried to convince her that everything was fine, the girl could not calm down and asked how she could make it up to him. She got emotional and blurted out that she could offer him wish fulfillment. Jae-hee Sunbae thought for a moment. Then he suddenly brightened up and said that he liked the idea of the right to wish and wanted to make one for her. The girl was so upset that she promised to fulfill 3 of his wishes because she felt that one was not enough to make it up to him. The guy tried to calm her down again, said it was his fault too. He said he made a girl run with a heavy bag. It made it even harder for her and he feels guilty. Unexpectedly, Haneul started rummaging through her bag. She said she had Min-cheol's sweatshirt, which would be just right for Sunbae so he wouldn't get cold while his shirt was being washed. She pulled out a sweatshirt and handed it to the guy. At that moment, the flash drive with those very films dropped right in front of them. The girl froze with fear and shame. She prayed to herself that the guy wouldn't notice the flash drive or realize what kind of flash drive she had taken from him. But Jae-hee Sunbae laughed cheerfully and said that he knew it was her who had taken his flash drive with the spicy films. Haneul sat practically senseless. She assured the guy that she had only opened one video and hadn't watched anything else. The guy laughed joyfully and said that he was even a little embarrassed that she had seen it. Both ended up feeling awkward. Neither of them could quite understand how they ended up in the laundromat so late at night, discussing something like this. Jae-hee Sunbae looked at the girl carefully. She asked why he was looking at her like that. He replied that it looked like the girl had seen something in the movie. Haneul panicked and started to explain that she really hadn't watched the video. It just happened to be familiar because she had seen it many years ago. She even had a dream thanks to this film. So she definitely didn't rummage through his folders or watch his movies. Jae-hee Sunbae said that he believed her, but he wondered what dream the girl was talking about. She replied that she was ashamed and would not tell him about her. Then the guy said that he was using his right to fulfill his desire. Haneul was shocked. She felt like she was trapped. Haneul realized that this man whom she mistook for an angel could very well become a devil. She asked him not to laugh at her. The girl blushed and covered her face with her hands. Peering with one eye, she said that she really liked the kissing scene in this film, and she would like to kiss someone she loves in the same way someday. Jae-hee Sunbae stared at the girl in surprise. Min-cheol finally made it home. Suddenly, a TV remote hit him in the forehead. Kim Min-cheol's mother stood menacingly in the doorway and started calling him a slacker. A woman was unhappy that her son didn't show up last weekend. She asked where he'd been all this time. She took a fly swatter and started hitting him, nagging him that the guy was supposed to visit her every weekend and he hadn't been home in 3 weeks. Min-cheol tried to defend himself. The guy had been sitting for 4 hours already, peeling anchovies. He grumbled at his mother for calling him home just to do chores. The woman replied that if he wanted free housing near campus, he shouldn't grumble. Min-cheol objected that it was his grandmother's apartment and it was already empty. Mom told him to stop arguing and come help her. The woman packed some snacks and kimchi in containers. She told her son to give some to Haneul as well. Suddenly, they heard a familiar female voice and looked out into the hallway. It was Haneul's mom. She came to visit Min-cheol's mom. The guy said hello politely. The woman was happy to see him, praised him for always being polite. She patted his shoulders since she was barely tall enough to reach his chin. Haneul's mom brought a bag of alcohol and snacks, said she planned to sit with his mother and relax for a while. She offered him to stay and sit with them, but the guy said he had to go back. Min-cheol began to hurriedly pack, not wanting to be alone with his mom and auntie anymore, saying he had to go back to campus immediately. The woman handed him a bag of goodies and wished him a good journey. The guy thought to himself that the package was quite heavy. Auntie also wished him a good journey, said she was glad she and Haneul had each other and asked him to keep an eye on her. Min-cheol awkwardly agreed, thinking to himself that Haneul was a pain in the ass. The woman thanked him again and ruffled his hair. It was quite late when the bus arrived at a stop near campus. Getting off the bus, Min-cheol twisted his head. He was sore from the long drive. The bags of food his mother had given him were heavy, too. He began to ponder how to give Haneul her package. She was probably with her boyfriend right now, and he had a shift at the restaurant tomorrow. He didn't want to bring the package to the university either. Then he thought, why should he complicate things, and pulled out his phone. Min-cheol sent her a message saying that if she wanted to pick up a package from her mom to come to his place and pick it up. At this time, Haneul was sitting in the laundry room and looked at Jae-hee Sunbae expectantly after her frank confession. The guy tried to hold back his laughter until he had tears in his eyes. And then he laughed hard. The girl squealed, reminding him that he had promised not to laugh at her. The young man couldn't stop. He said that it was hard to hold back his laughter when hearing something like that from a girl. Jae-hee Sunbae calmed down and said that she actually looks like a cute middle school girl. He smiled sweetly and said the guy who gets her first kiss should be proud. Haneul told the guy to stop teasing her, that he was acting more cocky now than he did at university. He laughed again and lowered his head. Jae-hee Sunbae wiped his tears of laughter and said that he hadn't laughed so heartily in a long time. He thought to himself, that's why the girl was behaving like that at his house, because his charms didn't work on her. When they said goodbye, the guy said he'd wash the sweatshirt and bring it back to her later. Suddenly, he asked her to exchange phone numbers. The girl said she already had him on Kakao Talk, but the guy still wanted her number. Jae-hee said if he had her phone number, it will make returning her sweatshirt more convenient. After exchanging numbers, the guy leaned over and whispered in the girl's ear that he would behave much nicer the next time they met. Goosebumps ran down Haneul's back. The girl was embarrassed and shouted in his wake not to whisper in her ear like that anymore because it was creepy. The guy laughed and said it was the last time he teased her and said goodbye. Haneul stared after him and thought how strangely the day had ended. Not at all how she had imagined it would. She picked up her phone and noticed the unread messages. The girl's eyes glistened with joy. Min-cheol had brought goodies from his mom. After a while, the girl burst into the guy's apartment without knocking as usual. Min-cheol stood with his bare torso only after showering and wiping his wet hair. He stared at the girl because he didn't expect her to come so soon. Haneul ostentatiously pressed her fingers over her eyes and shrieked that she'd rather be blind than see him like that. She asked why he was walking around naked, to which the guy nonchalantly replied that he had the right to take a bath in his own home. He said since she came for food, let her wait until he got dressed and he'd give it to her. Haneul sat down on the couch and waited for Min-cheol to return. The girl pouted her lips in anticipation and examined her nails. The guy came back and went straight to the refrigerator. He took out a bag and said that Mom had packed all her favorite things. The girl was in a state of happiness, said that just today she did not manage to eat, so she came to him at the right time. Looking into the bag, she drooled. There were braised beef and soy, pickled garlic leaves, and even spicy cucumber kimchi. The girl also noticed a black box and asked what it was. Upon taking out the contents, the young men saw a bottle of imported whiskey. They both stood there, not understanding why Mom had given it to them. And then Min-cheol realized that in a hurry, his mother had mixed up the packages and instead of snacks for the girl handed over the package with which Haneul's mother had arrived. The girl stood looking at the bottle while the guy said he had the wrong package and for her to put it back in. Suddenly, Haneul asked if they could try a little. The guy thought she was probably joking. The girl, however, blushed a little and conspiratorially offered to try this whiskey. Min-cheol looked at the girl skeptically and said that this bottle belonged to her mother. She brushed it off and said she could just text her mother and tell her they'd try her whiskey. She said the internet said it was delicious. The guy sighed and agreed to drink just one glass. The girl looked at him and teased him that he was very easy to manipulate. The young people made appetizers, clinked glasses, and began to drink. Haneul grimaced after the first sip. The whiskey was quite bitter, and they had just now decided to see what percentage of alcohol it contained. To their horror, it had 40% alcohol. They had never had such a strong drink before. The girl went to the kitchen to find a soda, saying that if they dilute it, it should make the drink more palatable. Finally, mixing the whiskey and soda, the young people tried the next glasses. Haneul was delighted. It was much tastier that way. They decided to try mixing whiskey with different types of sodas and juice and see how it would taste the best. But first, Haneul asked Min-cheol to borrow her pajamas. The guy stared at her in bewilderment. She looked at him determinedly and said her belt was pinching her, and she wanted to eat and drink as much as possible and feel comfortable. After a while, the girl stood in Min-cheol's things and grumbled that he had purposely given her his oversized clothes on purpose. The guy looked back at the girl and tried to hold back a chuckle. He said it's just that she looks like a hobbit. The girl got angry and said that she was taller than average and he was a bloody giant. The guy said that while she was changing, he made more appetizers because she was hungry. Haneul immediately got cheerful and said that giants aren't so bad. Min-cheol beckoned the girl over to the table, but only as she took a step did she realize that the clothes were so large that if she didn't hold on to them, she would simply fall off them onto the floor. The girl walked and thought about what Min-cheol had eaten to grow so big. Even the sleeves of his t-shirt reached almost to her wrists. Haneul suddenly thought that she had been feeling strange lately, worried if she had picked up any parasites. She decided that she needed to drink as much alcohol as possible to disinfect herself. A while later, a completely drunken Haneul was musing that whiskey really does taste very nice. Min-cheol, also quite drunk, teased the girl, saying she was saying it for the 30th time. He suggested she stop drinking so she wouldn't throw up herself like last time. Both were so intoxicated they didn't even realize they weren't talking to each other, but to pieces of furniture. Haneul fell to the floor and began rolling over with laughter. Min-cheol looked down at the girl and reached out a hand to fix a strand of her hair. The girl covered her eyes in pleasure. His touch was very gentle. Suddenly, he asked if she was going to text her boyfriend, and Haneul opened her eyes in surprise and replied that she didn't have a boyfriend. The guy chuckled and asked if some guy had confessed to her last night, to which the girl just brushed it off and said that nothing had happened. Min-cheol grinned. The girl noticed this and asked why he was suddenly so pleased. The guy sat back and said he knew she couldn't get a confession the first time they met. It hurt the girl's feelings. She moved closer to him and asked what made him think that. The guy just laughed and reminded her how all the boys in middle school had mistaken her for a guy because of her looks. In response, the girl said that he lacked masculinity because girls at school dressed him up in dresses and makeup. They kept to argue and teasing each other, and with each argument, their faces grew closer together. They stared at each other for a moment. The guy called her a tomboy, and the girl called him a delicate lady. At one point, their faces were so close that their noses touched. Haneul thought to herself that the guy had really grown up. Suddenly, Min-cheol leaned forward and kissed the girl. It happened so quickly that she stared at him in surprise. The guy didn't know what had gotten into him. The young men looked at each other dumbfounded, but both of them had already become eager. He ducked down again and began kissing Haneul more confidently. Leaning over her, the guy wondered why this was happening. Why with her, of all people? Haneul was just as surprised, her thoughts swirling in confusion. She had always dreamed of giving her first kiss to someone she truly loved, so she couldn't understand how something like this had happened between them. But then, to her surprise, she realized that it was far more pleasant than she had ever imagined. Her hands moved on their own, reaching for him, fingers tangling in his hair as a warmth spread through her chest. The girl pressed her breast tightly against the guy, and for a moment Min-cheol paused. Suddenly, he pulled the girl away from him and stared at her. Haneul didn't realize what was happening. The guy seemed to be seeing her for the first time. After a brief pause, he asked in a quiet, almost bewildered voice if she had always been this way. Haneul pulled off her t-shirt and began to examine herself. She said she had never given it much thought. She wondered why he was suddenly asking her about it. Suddenly, something dripped on her face, and she looked up. Min-cheol was hovering over her, staring down the neckline of her t-shirt, and blood was coming out of his nose. The guy wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand, clearly flustered. The girl, unable to hold back her laughter, teased him, saying he looked just like a little schoolboy who got a nosebleed from seeing something too exciting. Then she leaned over to him and tried to wipe the blood away with her hand, telling him not to move. The guy tried to stop her. He didn't keep his balance and fell leaning against the couch. A tantalizing picture opened before Haneul. The girl blushed and began to look at his athletic figure, broad chest and pumped legs. Min-cheol noticed her interested look, but didn't have time to say anything as the girl suddenly reached out and slipped her hand under his t-shirt. Her small fingers slid lightly over his torso. Dazed, he pressed his hand to his nose to stop the bleeding and asked what she was doing. The girl was on all fours between his legs and kept stroking him, saying that she had wanted to see his abs for a long time. Haneul was surprised that his stomach was soft. She thought it should be hard. The guy sighed and replied that it would get harder if he will tense it. The girl asked him to tense his abs so she could touch him, said she was very interested. She continued to run her hands over his body. The guy was holding back with all his might. Finally, he caught her hands and asked her to stop pawing him. The girl looked at him blankly. Suddenly, Min-cheol felt how soft the girl's skin was and began stroking her forearm with his thumb. The guy was breathing heavily and said he wanted to touch her too, but the girl replied that he wasn't allowed to touch her like that. She blushed and admitted that she felt shy when someone touched her. Suddenly, the guy intercepted her hand again and said, since they had known each other for a long time, she shouldn't be embarrassed by him. He grabbed her and said nothing would happen if he touched her like she touched him. Min-cheol began tickling her, his fingers squeezing her ribs while the girl screamed with laughter. Haneul begged him to stop and laughed as the guy tickled her in her most sensitive places. Finally, the girl got more air into her lungs and yelled for him to stop. The guy stopped and hovered over her and continued to look at her with interest. Haneul lay on the floor while he held her hands. During their playful struggle, her t-shirt had ridden up slightly. The sight made the guy freeze for a moment, his grip unconsciously tightening as his gaze lingered. He asked if she was okay, to which the girl indignantly replied that after all he had done to her, he dared to ask. The guy looked at her and realized that she was not embarrassed by him at all, and in his alcohol-clouded mind, an idea arose. He lightly ran his fingers along her ribs, but the girl no longer felt ticklish. The guy realized that the girl didn't feel uncomfortable around him, so he continued almost unconsciously. He thought that maybe he had lost his mind as he leaned in closer to her. The soft hair of the guy tickled her, and she tried to get up, but then she felt something wet. She asked the guy to stop for a moment and lift his head up. Min-cheol looked at her. His eyes clouded with haze and his nose was bleeding again. The girl got worried and said that his nose was bleeding again. She asked if he had overexerted himself today, or if he was really that crazy about her. Min-cheol felt embarrassed. He clumsily wiped his nose with his elbow and said that it wasn't true. The girl began to twist her head around looking for tissues to help him wipe up the blood. She looked at the guy and couldn't understand why he was just sitting there and not even trying to help her with her search. Blood was so hard to get out, especially from white clothes. Min-cheol just sat there looking at Haneul while blood continued to drip from his nose. Losing her patience, the girl approached him and began wiping the blood with her hands so that the guy's t-shirt wouldn't be completely ruined. Then she pulled back and told him to try to stop the bleeding after all. But Min-cheol didn't let her finish, suddenly kissing her again. But the girl pulled away and started complaining that now, because of him, she had a taste of blood in her mouth. The guy was breathing heavily, as if a trigger had been pulled, and he stopped thinking clearly. He leaned forward again, pulling her into an embrace with one arm, even though Haneul tried to push him away. Haneul didn't keep her balance and fell to the floor. Trying to catch her breath, the girl once again felt the gentle touch of the guy. No one had ever touched her in such a way before. Haneul was frightened. Her breathing hitched and she thought everything that was happening was crazy. She looked at Min-cheol as if she could find the answer in his eyes. Such situations had never occurred between them before, so now she was experiencing conflicting feelings, fear and curiosity. She felt his gentle touches and the sensations frightened her, so she asked him to stop. When Min-cheol pulled back, the girl glanced at his shorts and blushed, her eyes rounded with horror. Seeing him, Haneul was startled, thinking what the hell is going on? Her face flamed with shame. Suddenly, she thought, could this really happen right here and now? And could it really be her childhood best friend, Kim Min-cheol? The girl struggled with her desires. The guy looked away distantly, then sighed and asked what she was thinking about. Haneul continued to stare at him, not knowing what to answer or what to do next. She had to make a decision. Haneul thought about the fact that she had enjoyed kissing Min-cheol far more than she could have imagined, and she thought she might get even more pleasure out of what followed the kissing. The girl reached over and took his face in her hands. She decided that she wanted to try it, so she looked into the guy's eyes and asked if he had protection. Then something clicked in Haneul's head. She pushed the guy away, jumped up, and ran away from him. Waking up in the morning, the girl didn't immediately realize where she was. Looking around a bit, she realized she was in Min-cheol's room. And then memories and realizations came flooding back to her. She clutched her head in horror. Even though she was very drunk, she remembered everything. Min-cheol wasn't prepared for such a turn of events, and that was the only reason they almost made a mistake. Haneul felt bad. The situation with her sudden intrusion was resolved, but what happened yesterday would not be forgotten. She was ashamed to look him in the eye. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the alarm clock, and the girl remembered that she had important classes today, so she jumped out of bed and started to get dressed. She decided that she would deal with the uni first and then talk to Min-cheol afterwards. Classes at uni were coming to an end. One of Min-cheol's friends burst into the classroom and upon seeing him said he hadn't been able to reach him all day. Min-cheol had been in the astral all day. He couldn't focus and think about anything other than what happened yesterday, so he didn't even notice his friend. His friends couldn't understand what was wrong with him. He'd been like that since morning. One of them started bothering Min-cheol and saying that he should come to their party because the girls liked him, and they would only come if Min-cheol was present. The guy retorted that even if the girls came, they would leave very quickly because Sunbai is always annoying them with his behavior. Sighing, Min-cheol said he couldn't come anyway because he had a part-time job until 7 p.m. But his friend cheerfully replied that he could still join them after work because they were going to meet just at that time. The guy realized he couldn't get out of it. Min-cheol realized that his friend would not leave him so easily, so he replied that he would join them for a while. Sunbi perked up and thanked him. While the young man was telling his second friend to send out an announcement that Min-cheol would be with them, the guy dropped his head on his hands and couldn't get yesterday's picture out of his mind. The image of Haneul, how she looked and the feelings she stirred in him, lingered in his mind. Min-cheol blushed and felt himself starting to get excited. He tried to control his own emotions, but was afraid that he would go crazy. At this time, Haneul had finished her last lecture and was happy that she had successfully completed her homework assignment. Then she realized that the end of class meant that she might soon meet Min-cheol, and she didn't know how to talk to him or what to say. She couldn't say she was crazy about the sight of his muscles. She didn't know how to explain what had happened between them yesterday. While the girl was freaking out from her protesting feelings at the neighboring desk, her friends were laughing merrily, and it annoyed her. Haneul irritably asked what they were having so much fun at, to which the girls cheerfully asked if she was interested in looking at something. They showed her a newly released adult webtoon. The girls were delighted and suggested that she read it too. Haneul was a little embarrassed, but she was very interested because it was a webtoon with many explicit scenes. A group of young people were having a good time, clinking glasses of alcohol. Min-cheol sat with an indifferent expression on his face while one of the girls tried to strike up a conversation with him. She was trying to treat him to sashimi. At the same time, another girl was offering to make him her signature cocktail. The guy started to get annoyed and wondered when it would end. He didn't want to be in this place at all. His friends sat across the table and were jealous of such attention from the girls. As long as Min-cheol was with them, no one paid any attention to them. Suddenly, one of the girls started complaining that all the beer was gone. Min-cheol thought this was his chance to get away, so he said he was going to the store to get a beer. The girls immediately offered to go with him, but the guy refused and said he could manage on his own. On his way out, he checked his phone, but there were no messages from Haneul. He thought about writing first, but did not know what to send at all. Meanwhile, Haneul was absorbed in reading erotic manga. She had never read such an interesting webtoon before. It was a whole new world. Haneul read chapter after chapter and didn't notice how she ate all the snacks. She liked to eat while reading, so she decided to go to the store. She headed to the nearest store without taking a break from reading. The girl admired how detailed the artist managed to convey the features of the human body. The explicit scenes were drawn in great detail. She looked at the pictures and wondered if doing it was really that enjoyable. Walking past the racks of produce, Haneul stopped suddenly. She stared at the small boxes and thought that if even one of them had been within reach yesterday, she and Min-cheol definitely wouldn't have stopped. Many questions immediately arose in the girl's mind about how it would be like. Would it hurt or would it feel good? Haneul blushed and scolded herself for thinking so much about indecent things lately. So she realized she wanted to try to do it, but she didn't know with whom. She thought she might suggest that Kim Min-cheol do that. After all, what happened yesterday between them was definitely something he liked, and maybe he had thought about it too. The girl picked up a small pack with the intention of buying it just in case. Suddenly, she heard the shop door open and the salesman greeted the new customer. In the doorway stood Min-cheol, staring at Haneul and what she was holding in her hands. The young people sat on a campus bench in awkward silence. Min-cheol thought about the fact that he already didn't know how to start a conversation with her and didn't expect to bump into her in the shop. Haneul was thinking about where they would meet and didn't expect to see each other so soon. The guy couldn't believe what he had seen, how the girl was picking out protection. The girl was embarrassed and silent, wondering if he had noticed what she had bought or not. Their silence made Min-cheol's tension grow. He didn't know how to justify his behavior yesterday. While the girl tried to think of a way to start a conversation about yesterday without scaring him off. The guy said he wanted to talk about what had happened last night. Haneul brightened up, hoping to start a conversation. To his surprise, she was completely calm and looked at him intently. He felt awkward and said they had been drinking too much last night and had done something stupid, suggested they forget about it and continue to be friends as before. The guy looked at the girl and saw that she was upset. Min-cheol didn't understand what the hell was going on, why the girl reacted like that. Haneul blushed at the thought that she had almost suggested doing that with him, and he wanted to forget everything. She was very ashamed. She thought she had lost her mind. She then turned to the guy and told him that they would forget about what had happened and continue to be friends as before, and asked him not to feel awkward around her. She started patting Min-cheol on the shoulder, repeating that all was well between them. The guy sat awkwardly, not knowing what to say. The girl smiled strainedly, trying to create a relaxed atmosphere. Suddenly, Haneul realized that the guy had a very strong and muscular back. She complimented him, said he was in very good shape, and assumed he was probably doing exercises with heavy weights. The guy irritatedly replied that he had already told her many times that he was working out at the gym and had long advised her to take care of her body, since it would not hurt for her to tighten up and pump up. The girl, without paying attention to him, suddenly pressed herself against his chest and began to feel him. It turned out that his chest and arms were also quite pumped up. The dumbfounded Min-cheol pulled the girl away from him in embarrassment. Haneul was startled as she unconsciously pressed herself against him, while the guy didn't realize why he hugged the girl so lightly in return. The girl said she had to go back to her dormitory, stood up abruptly, and tripped over her foot with her leg. Min-cheol, noticing this, immediately shouted to her to be careful and rushed to her aid. He caught the girl who was about to fall face down in an instant. Haneul realized what had happened and was embarrassed. Then she realized that Min-cheol's arm was hugging her under her breast. The guy at that time also felt embarrassed by the closeness with the girl. The young people froze in that position and both felt goosebumps creeping up their bodies. Haneul could feel the guy's heart beating frantically with her back. Min-cheol kept hugging the girl with his arm and felt her heart beating rapidly. The thought flashed through his mind that he wanted to hug her even tighter, to hold her against him. Suddenly, the girl interrupted their silence and turned to the lad with a request. Blushing, she asked if she could stay the night at his place. After a while, the young people entered Min-cheol's apartment without interrupting their kissing. Once inside, the guy laid the girl right on the floor. They looked into each other's eyes, both excited and a little embarrassed. Min-cheol pulled away from the girl and looked up the stairs, thinking they had better move to his bedroom. He put the girl's arms round his neck and asked her to hold on to him tightly. Then he lifted her in his arms and with a few quick steps climbed the stairs. The girl squeezed her eyes shut in fear until she felt herself lying on the bed. The guy blushed. Couldn't believe they would actually do this. Haneul stared at him and wondered if it would ruin their 20-year friendship if they did this. But in the end, her curiosity got the best of her. Not fully understanding what to do, Min-cheol simply repeated after the girl. Haneul felt the gentle touches of the guy again, but she couldn't relax like last night. Apparently, the alcohol made it easier for her not to think about what was going on. Min-cheol was just as tense as she was and kept asking what he should do and how. This only irritated the girl, and she told him that she had no more experience than he did. At one point, the girl felt a surge of fear. She couldn't believe what was happening. To her surprise, Min-cheol was quieter than usual and focused. Although everything felt a bit awkward, the girl could sense his care. It was almost morning, yet the young couple still hadn't gone to bed. Haneul was absolutely exhausted and was horrified at what a psycho the guy had turned out to be. Min-cheol apologized, but the girl had already passed out. She was so tired she just fell asleep. The girl had a dream memory of her and Min-cheol catching bugs in the woods as children. She was running so fast that the boy could barely keep up with her and ended up tripping and falling. Haneul came back and gave him a hand, saying he was clumsy. She suggested that he hold hands while they walked, then neither of them would fall. Min-cheol looked at the girl with eyes full of surprise and then agreed. While the girl sweetly slept, the guy lay on the floor and could not sleep a wink thinking about what happened between them. Haneul was walking with her friends after class when one of them suddenly drew the girl's attention to the sports field. It was like the guys were trying out for the basketball team. The girls stopped to stare. Haneul remembered that the team competition was about to begin. One of her friends shouted loudly in support of a guy she knew. The guy put his fingers up in a gesture of victory. The girls were not sure that the guys from their faculty would pass to the team, because usually no one from the art faculty passed the qualifying rounds. Suddenly, her friends called out to Haneul and said that the management and media departments were competing at another venue. She looked at the field and saw how Min-cheol brilliantly put the ball in the ring. Everyone around admired him. The guy almost single-handedly defeated all the players. Girls said he was in very good shape and wondered why he didn't go to the sports department. Min-cheol noticed Haneul and teasingly showed her his tongue. The girl was about to leave when he ran up to her and asked if she was going to her campus. He asked her to wait for him so they could go together. Suddenly, the guy jumped up and started climbing the wall. Haneul, waiting for him, said that he could just climb the stairs like a normal person. Min-cheol asked if she had already eaten, and the girl replied that she had just eaten with Minji. Haneul thought that the guy was behaving as usual. There was no awkwardness between them. His voice snapped her out of her musings. He suggested they have dinner together. The girl thought about what her plans were for the evening. At the same time, a guy on a bicycle was speeding behind them. Min-cheol pulled the girl against him with one tug, saving her from colliding with the bike rider. He angrily shouted at him to be careful and watch where he was going. Min-cheol kept hugging Haneul's shoulder and grumbling that guy almost ran over her. He asked if she was okay. The girl stood with red cheeks, though she thought everything would be as before. Her heart was racing and she was very embarrassed at how close they were to each other. Lee Johan dropped his head on the desk. He, along with Minji and Haneul, were on a group mission. Even though they had to hand in the assignment the next day, the girl suggested that he rest for a while. The guy stood up and said he couldn't take it anymore. He went to the cupboard, got a pillow and a blanket, and made a sort of bed out of his desks and said he needed a couple of hours' sleep. Minji stared at how instantly the guy started snoring. She got up from the table and said she had to have coffee or she'd fall asleep too. The girl asked Haneul to come with her, but she did not reply. Minji called out to her again. The girl was staring at her phone with a gloomy expression. Haneul paid no attention to anything around her. She decided to ask a question about their relationship with Min-cheol on one forum. Suddenly, Minji's voice rang out behind her back. The girl was startled and clutched the phone to her chest, but it was too late. A friend had time to read what she had written about on the forum and asked if what she had seen was true. Haneul stared at her friend in horror, not knowing where to begin. Sometime later, upon hearing about what had happened between Min-cheol and Haneul, Minji fell into a trance and gripped her coffee glass so tightly that it started to spill. Haneul could see that her friend was furious. She was squeezing her hands so hard that the coffee was dripping right onto her hands. The girl screamed. She couldn't believe her friend had slept with Min-cheol. Haneul asked her to be quieter. She didn't want anyone to hear about it and was embarrassed. She blushed and said it was true. She was embarrassed because she didn't know what had come over her. The girl hid her face in her hood from embarrassment and asked her friend not to judge her. Minji wondered if this meant they were now dating and why her friend hadn't told her anything earlier. When she heard from Haneul that they were not dating at all, the girl became furious. She squeezed her coffee glass so hard that it spilled all over. She was ready to strangle Min-cheol for treating her friend like that. Minji wiped her hands and said that the next time she met this guy, he would be in trouble. She asked the girl how she was feeling now, asked if her heart was pounding at the sight of Min-cheol, and Haneul said yes. But when asked if she liked him as a boyfriend, the girl answered in the negative. She admitted that her heart does beat more often at the sight of him, but it's more of a physical attraction than a deep feeling. The girl honestly admitted that she can't imagine a relationship with him. Then, Minji noted that despite everything, thinking about her own first experience, the girl thought of Min-cheol first. Haneul hesitated and said it was probably because she was sure he would never hurt her. Minji asked how Min-cheol himself felt about all this, to which her friend replied that he was acting as usual, as if nothing had happened. The girl said she had been following them since high school and was sure he had feelings for his childhood friend. But Haneul objected and said she was sure it wasn't anything special for either of them. Minji then suggested that she test the guy's reaction and do exactly what she was about to tell her to do. Haneul texted Min-cheol, asked where he was, and offered to have lunch together. He replied that he had a class in his building and asked her not to come. He said he would find her himself after class. The girl was surprised to receive such a strange text message, thought maybe he was hiding something from her, and decided she wasn't going to follow him anyway. But after a while, Haneul was standing outside Min-cheol's auditorium, smiling contentedly. The fact that he had asked her not to come, on the contrary, had encouraged her to come straight to him. Finally, the doors of the auditorium opened and students started coming out. The girl began to look for a familiar face among the crowd. There were 3 times as many people in this department as in hers. Suddenly, some bloke stared at her and then shouted her name across the corridor, pointing his finger at her. Haneul felt awkward. She didn't know him and didn't understand why he paid such attention to her. Everyone around started to turn around and stare at the girl. The girl heard the students whispering and saying that it was the same Haneul and something about Kim Min-cheol. At this time, Min-cheol finally came out of the auditorium and didn't realize what all the fuss was about. He saw Haneul surrounded by his classmates. The guy rushed towards her and began shouting at everyone around to make them move and get away from her. By the time he got to her, the girl was already desperate. She didn't understand why all these people were looking at her with such interest. Min-cheol began to scold everyone around him for such behavior. After all, the girl was not a circus monkey to be viewed in such a way. He grabbed the guy who started all this by the chest and asked why he did all this. The guy replied that they were just interested in looking at the girl. Min-cheol runs away too every day and doesn't want to show to anyone. The guy got angry. He heard everyone around whispering. He decided that he and Haneul needed to get out quickly. Once outside, Min-cheol turned to the girl and said that he had asked her not to come just because something like this might happen. The girl ran after him so fast she could barely stand on her feet, trying to catch her breath. She sat down on a bench and the guy started telling her off, saying she should exercise to improve her stamina. Haneul asked if she could lean on him briefly. She rested her head against his torso almost unconsciously, regaining her breath. And then a memory popped into her head that Minji had advised her to watch the guy's reaction when a girl would touch him. Haneul realized that this was the right moment and looked up at the guy. She was sure he wouldn't be able to act normal. And in fact, the guy stood there looking away in embarrassment. The girl couldn't see the expression on his face, but she noticed that the tips of his ears were reddening. Suddenly, behind her back came the voice of Jae-hee Sunbae, which startled her, and she jerked sharply and hit Min-cheol's head right in the stomach. While the girl scolded the guy for sneaking up on her and scaring her, Min-cheol twisted in half, holding his stomach in pain. Jae-hee Sunbae lightheartedly guffawed and then turned his attention to the guy and asked Haneul who it was. Wasn't it her boyfriend? Min-cheol stared aggressively at the unfamiliar guy and thought, who the hell is this guy? It was late at night, and the girl coming out of the motel was smiling contentedly. She said she was satisfied today and forgives the guy. Jae-hee Sunbae said that he tried his best and smiled back at the girl. The girl said she had to go to the station and reached out to him and said she wanted the guy to kiss her goodbye. Jae-hee Sunbae had already leaned towards her but suddenly remembered the conversation with Haneul in the laundry room. He remembered the girl's innocent discourse on kissing and couldn't contain his laughter. His companion became angry and started shouting at him out of resentment for this behavior. The guy himself apologized and thought he would like to meet Haneul. So the next day, he was on campus and found her in the company of some guy. The girl introduced them to each other. She said that Min-cheol was her childhood friend and Jae-hee Sunbae was a second-year student in her department. The guys looked at each other incredulously. Jae-hee Sunbae tried to smile in a friendly manner while Min-cheol decided that this guy was not to be trusted. Haneul, sensing the tense atmosphere, asked Sunbae what had brought him to her. Jae-hee looked mischievously at the guy and decided to make him a little nervous. He approached the girl, smiled sweetly, and asked if they were in a relationship where they didn't need an excuse to see each other. Haneul looked at him incomprehensibly and asked if they were on such close terms. The guy laughed good-naturedly and said he was joking. He just wanted her jacket back. The girl was pleasantly surprised that he even laundered it. Suddenly, Min-cheol, who saw his jacket, became indignant and asked what the hell it was doing with this guy. Jae-hee Sunbae put his hand on his chest and said with an innocent look that he couldn't refuse it because Haneul practically forced him to strip in the street. While the girl panicked and tried to explain that it wasn't what it sounded like and scolded the Sunbae, a bunch of unpleasant thoughts ran through Min-cheol's head. He picked up the jacket bag and began to furtively back away, while Haneul frantically tried to tell him how it really was. Jae-hee Sunbae, who was enjoying the scene, waved to the guys and waved his hand to say he had to leave. Haneul frantically tried to stop the guy and asked him to go back and explain everything to Min-cheol. The young people were left alone in awkward silence. After a while, having discussed and calmed down, Min-cheol asked the girl why she was looking for him. Haneul replied that she wanted to have lunch with him. The girl thought to herself that she had actually come for a casual touch. Last time she hadn't been able to see his face, now she hoped to see his real reaction. The unsuspecting Min-cheol began to suggest to the girl various options of where they could go for lunch, while she thought of how she could touch him most naturally. The guy turned to look at the girl to ask her opinion. At that moment, Haneul reached out and touched the lad's cheek with her finger, as if a target had been drawn there. There was silence between them. The guy didn't know how to react to this, and the girl froze in horror. She thought she'd screwed up big time. It was as unnatural as possible, and she didn't know how to get out of it. Min-cheol didn't budge, only looked at her like she was crazy and asked what she was doing. Haneul, surprised at his reaction, removed her finger from his cheek. She expected him to scold her and grumble as usual, but he was perfectly calm and a little embarrassed. Seeing this expression on his face, the girl froze and felt her heart begin to beat faster and faster. She remembered Minji's words and wondered if she really liked Kang Min-cheol. It just couldn't be. The girl recoiled in horror and continued to stare at the guy. She couldn't believe she'd like a jerk like Min-cheol. She thought he was a dumbass whose behavior couldn't be fixed no matter how hard she tried. The guy had just been staring at the girl in silence the whole time and didn't know what was going on. Suddenly, the girl started grumbling that she didn't like the fact that he gritted his teeth in his sleep. that whenever she tried to study for exams, he distracted her, but then he passed them all successfully. The guy bristled, asking why she was suddenly picking a fight. Ignoring him, Haneul went on to say that he spends so much time every morning styling his hair that he is constantly late for his couple's classes. She went on and on telling the guy everything that pissed her off about him, when he couldn't take it anymore, and shouted that she was sleeping with her eyes open in the first place. Both were silent for a moment and stared at each other with incandescent eyes. Then they reached for each other at the same time, grabbed each other's hair, and started pulling. They sat like that on the bench like little children. Haneul told him to let her go, or passers-by would think they were a couple, to which Min-cheol replied that no one in their right mind would want to be in couple with her. Neither of them wanted to give in to the other and let their hands go first. They agreed to let each other go on the count of 3, but when they finished counting, neither of them let go. Each of them became angry and accused the other of dishonesty, continuing to pull their hair even harder. Haneul stared at Min-cheol's face. Suddenly uncomfortable, she let go of her hands and shoved the guy in the chest. She jumped up from the bench, breathing heavily, and stepped away from him. Nervous, the girl wrapped her arms around herself and, afraid to look the guy in the eye, asked him not to see her for a while. Min-cheol stared at her incomprehensibly. The girl said that what happened yesterday was her own initiative and she didn't know what to say for herself. But she didn't understand why the guy was so calm. She said that because of what happened last night between them, they would not date, and she wanted to continue being friends with him. But for the moment, being around him made her feel very uncomfortable. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the guy's reaction. Hearing these words, Min-cheol froze for a moment, opened his mouth to say something, but then decided not to say anything and clenched his jaw tightly. The guy stood up and replied that he understood her and would leave right away. Haneul felt guilty, but she thought it would be better for both of them to not see each other for a while. Suddenly, her cell phone rang. The girl turned away tiredly and answered it. It was her mother, asking if her daughter was coming home tomorrow. The girl stared incomprehensibly in front of her, asking why she had to go home. The woman scolded her daughter for forgetfulness and said that tomorrow was the beginning of the Fall Harvest Festival. She told her daughter to come home with Min-cheol because she and his mother had prepared a lot of delicious things to eat. The girl turned around in horror and saw a guy talking on the phone. At that time, Min-cheol had a similar conversation with his mother, who demanded that he and Haneul come home together. Thus, the young people ended up on the same bus, sitting next to each other on the way home. Saying goodbye to her mother, Haneul thought about how she could go home with him together after everything she had just said. She pulled out her phone and began to reassure herself that she would just take another bus. But opening the app, she was horrified. There was only one bus left to their house for tomorrow. In that case, all she had to do was pick a spot as far away from the guy as possible. It was Chuseok's magic because there were only 2 seats left, and they were right next to each other. She turned around in horror and stared at the guy. That's how they ended up together again. Haneul sat there exhausted, and Min-cheol rested his head on his hand in frustration. The guy glanced at the girl and saw that she was sitting with glazed eyes of horror. He sighed heavily. He wanted to keep quiet, but then he decided he should tell her after all. He took in a lungful of air and said he was going to tell her something she'd apparently forgotten. The girl was all ears. That night, when the girl was already exhausted, she practically passed out. But she kept muttering something, so Min-cheol ducked down to hear her better. Haneul asked him not to ignore her later because of what happened, said she wouldn't survive if he disappeared from her life. The guy was struck by her sincerity and the desperation in her voice. Then the girl fell soundly asleep. Gritting his teeth, Min-cheol continued to say that that was why he was acting as usual and pretending that nothing had happened, even though it was not easy for him. That was why he was angry when he realized that the girl had forgotten everything and resented him for his behavior. Realizing everything, Haneul felt very guilty. She embarrassedly apologized, but the guy reassured her and told her it was okay now. He said he didn't want to feel uncomfortable around her either. On returning home, Min-cheol's mother and Haneul threw their arms around each other. While they hugged and asked each other how they were doing, the boy bowed politely to Haneul's mother and made his way into the house. The girl ran to hug her mother while Min-cheol stood in the doorway with her bags like that. Haneul hugged her mother, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, and was glad to be home again. Suddenly, the woman asked how she and Min-cheol felt after drinking that day. The girl stared at her mother incomprehensibly. The guy froze in place at what he heard. The woman went on to say that Haneul had called her herself and told her that they had drunk the whiskey they had taken by mistake. Pulling herself together, the girl replied that they had only had a few drinks and went straight to rest. From the kitchen came the voice of Min-cheol's mother asking them to come and help set the table, and the guys jumped at the chance to interrupt the conversation. Haneul's eyes widened at how many delicious things were on the table. But because she was trying her best to act normal, she couldn't relax and enjoy her meal. While the guy chose not to think about anything at all, the girl realized that they would have to spend these days together, and she urgently needed to think of something. Suddenly, she got the idea to pretend she had indigestion, then she could be alone for a while. The girl started shoveling food into her mouth very much and quickly. But a little later, she realized that it would not be possible to fake illness, as her stomach proved to be surprisingly strong. At this time, Min-cheol asked for dessert, offering to cut up fruit. Soon, there was a plate of sliced fruit on the table, and Min-cheol's mother, holding out her fork, Haneul asked if she had heard about the release of the new film. The girl got excited and said she'd like to see it. Then the woman smiled and said she had a coupon for a trip to the cinema. Haneul was even more excited and offered to go together, but the woman said she wasn't interested, and especially she planned to visit the new cafe with the girl's mother. And then she said that the girl and Min-cheol could go to the movies together. The guy peeling the orange froze in place, and Haneul broke out in a cold sweat. Both young people were not happy with this idea. Haneul decided that something had to be done and was about to say that she wanted to go to the cafe with the women. But the words stuck in her throat because it was the premiere of a film she really wanted to see. In the end, she still couldn't turn down going to the cinema and was left standing with her mouth open. Later, the young people were standing in the lobby of the cinema, and the girl was nervously shuffling from foot to foot. Min-cheol said he was going out to buy popcorn, and Haneul exhaled, thinking that she really is the kind of person who has a hard time fighting her urges. The cinema was practically empty. As the young people sat down in their seats, Haneul thought about how she really wanted to watch this film, but wasn't sure she could concentrate. But contrary to her fears, the film went smoothly. She sobbed, and Min-cheol was bored. Walking out of the auditorium, the girl's eyes were red and swollen with tears, but she was determined to watch this film again later on. Min-cheol made fun of her for being so mature and still crying at sad moments. The girl responded by saying that he cried himself. As much as he tried to deny it, his reddened and swollen eyes spoke for themselves. Suddenly, Haneul saw the photo booth on her way out of the cinema, and a cunning plan ripened in her head. She dragged the guy there, saying they hadn't been photographed together in a long time, ignoring his protests. At first, Min-cheol didn't want to get involved, but then he saw that the girl was having fun, and he had fun too. Friends started having fun and fooling around like the old days. For a moment, they forgot the events of the past days and became just childhood friends again. After taking the photo, they went to the slot machines and played until Min-cheol dragged the losing Haneul away from there. Having had a lot of fun, they went out into the cold evening air. Haneul stared up at the starry sky. Though it wasn't that late, the days had grown shorter and cooler with the onset of autumn. Heading home, the girl offered to have a beer, and the guy readily agreed to it. Then both of them simultaneously shuddered as they remembered what their last time drinking alcohol together had resulted in. And they immediately rushed home, agreeing on the way that drinking beer was a bad idea. Rushing down the road, Haneul heard a familiar male voice call her by name. She, along with Min-cheol, turned around and saw a familiar guy. The guy extended his finger in their direction and yelled their names and then said he recognized them. The young man looked at him incredulously and then recognized him. It turned out to be the same classmate who always made fun of them during their run-ins at school. Young people came to sit in a cafe and remember their school years. The guy was surprised that Min-cheol and Haneul were still spending time together. The guys couldn't believe that they had just met their former classmate in the street. It had been 4 years since they graduated. While they talked, Haneul tried to cut her food into small pieces, and Min-cheol watched her futile attempts. Finally, with a sigh, he took the cutlery from her and said he would help her. The guy started cutting up the food, grumbling at the girl that she didn't even know how to use a knife. Their friend smiled and asked if they had finally become a couple. He remembered how they had threatened that if that happened, one of them would cut off his balls and the other would shave herself bald. Min-cheol choked with surprise and Haneul stared at the guy in silence. Coughing, Min-cheol asked if their friend had lost his mind. The guy replied that it looked like there were romantic feelings between the two of them after all. Haneul was angry and embarrassed. She pointed her finger at Min-cheol and shouted, "Why, the guy thought she might have feelings for someone like him." Plus, she later changed her promise to cut her hair bald. The guy wondered what she had promised. The girl hesitated for a moment and then blushing replied that she was going to be an old maid for the rest of her life. The guy wouldn't stop and said that there was a romantic aura in the air between the two of them anyway. Min-cheol, still clearing his throat, replied that he was wrong, and the girl said that the guy seemed drunk. Suddenly, he announced that they hadn't had a drink yet and offered to order alcoholic beverages. Haneul immediately refused, saying that she had a low tolerance for alcohol. Then a friend said that this restaurant had a great selection of fruit beer and suggested she try it. Haneul was interested because she liked beer very much. Min-cheol listened to the girl agree to drink the beer with a glare, but he didn't want to openly make any remarks to her so as not to cause a new wave of jokes about their relationship. Finishing the third glass of beer, the girl smacked her lips with pleasure and said that she should have tasted such deliciousness long ago. Min-cheol angrily clutched his glass and couldn't believe that the girl was going to get drunk again. The young people sat around and reminisced about the fun days of high school. They recalled playing with the water hose in the summer and being scolded for it, and how they participated in tug-of-war. Haneul had blood all over her hands at the time, and the guy admitted he's been afraid of girls ever since. Suddenly, the girl staggered to her feet and said she was going to the loo and asked not to discuss funny stories without her. The guys were left alone, and a former classmate asked when the sports competition would start at the university. Min-cheol said in 2 weeks. His friend smiled and said that the guy's faculty would definitely win. Min-cheol stared at his friend and asked what he meant. The guy replied that it goes without saying that the physical education department would win. Min-cheol clenched his hands and said he was studying business admin. The guy was surprised and asked how this happened, as he remembered that Min-cheol was a successful athlete back in middle school. The young man propped his head up with his hand and replied that he stopped playing sports in his first year of high school, and since they were attending different schools at the time, his friend did not know about it. Suddenly, Min-cheol poured a glass of soju, said that nothing special had happened, he just realized he was bored with sport and offered his friend a drink. The guy sitting across from him stared at him in surprise. He was sure his friend was considered a promising athlete, and he couldn't understand what had changed so dramatically. At this time, Min-cheol thumped his shot glass loudly on the table and grumbled that soju has a nasty taste. Before they knew it, the second round of songs at the karaoke bar was coming to an end. Haneul sang the same song over and over, and the boys discussed that the girl hadn't changed at all since high school. The guy wondered about the girl's musical taste, saying he wasn't too sophisticated and he wouldn't understand it. Min-cheol replied with the satisfied smile that his mother had instilled in Haneul a love for music. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of her singing. It was a song about a girl going to give her lips to a guy. Min-cheol stared at how beautiful she was, while Haneul smiled and looked straight at him and sang a song with the words that she would give him everything. The guys were having fun and laughing. He was amused by Haneul's voice and turned to Min-cheol saying that she sings hilarious. He wanted to make fun of her. But he saw that Min-cheol sat mesmerized by the girl. He only replied that she was really marvelous. The friend was just convinced once again that there was clearly something romantic going on between these two. And although Haneul didn't score a single point for singing, she was pleased with herself. The girl said she was going out to buy herself a soft drink, offered to buy some for the guys, but they refused. The guy was about to suggest choosing the next song when Min-cheol suddenly got up from his seat, grabbed Haneul's jacket, and followed her. The young man looked his way and thought it was expected. These two walked together all the time. Min-cheol went out on the street looking for the girl. He had been going round and round when suddenly he saw Haneul. The girl sat on a small stool and licked an ice cream. She looked up at Min-cheol with embarrassment. The guy got indignant, said he'd been looking for her around all the drink machines. The girl hiccuped and said she had a sudden craving for ice cream, so she ended up in this place. Min-cheol lifted her to her feet and threw her jacket over her shoulders. thought for a moment, and taking off his jacket, put it on the girl too. He gently buttoned her jacket up to her chin and told her that if she ate ice cream in this cold, she might get sick. He looked her in the eye and muttered who she thought would take care of her if she got sick. Haneul looked into his eyes and her cheeks flushed. She was amazed at his concern. She rose up on her toes and reached her lips to the guy's. Min-cheol blushed and rambled on, asking the girl what she was up to and what had come over her. The girl was embarrassed and lowered her head. She said she just suddenly wanted to kiss him. The guy held his gaze on the girl, wondering why she said that, and then grabbed her by the shoulders. The girl's hand holding the ice cream came down, and the ice cream began to melt, dripping to the ground. In the darkness of the street passage stood a boy and a girl, tightly pressed together, kissing each other. Min-cheol pressed the girl against the wall and kissed her passionately. The young people gave in to their feelings and couldn't stop themselves. The guy briefly pulled away from the girl, looking into her eyes, both breathing heavily. Then he kissed her with renewed vigor. It was insane. Haneul raised her hand, and a drop of ice cream dripped down onto Min-cheol's arm, dousing him with coldness. He pulled away from the girl to see what was wrong, and seeing the ice cream on his hand, said it was very cold. The girl watched as a drop of ice cream ran down the guy's wrist. Suddenly, she grabbed Min-cheol's hand and pulled him to her, licking the naughty drop with her tongue. Such a sight stirred the lad's mind. He froze and his body was covered in goosebumps. The guy abruptly withdrew his hand, and the other reached out and covered Haneul's face, asking what the hell she was doing. The girl giggled and muttered that the guy just had a huge hand covering her whole face. Min-cheol blushed when he heard the implication in her words. Taking his hand away, he exhaled and said that she should stop drinking because in that state she was being careless and could get into trouble. The girl looked at him carefully and exhaled and said he was right. She rested her head on the guy's chest and said she didn't understand why she kept doing all these things to him. She mumbled that she didn't even have romantic feelings for him, but for some reason she desperately wanted it. Min-cheol looked at the girl clinging to him and didn't know how to react to her words. On the one hand, it was offensive, but he didn't know what he felt for the girl now. After a while, Min-cheol went back to his friend to the karaoke room. The guy was finishing a song. The guy said that he and Haneul had been gone so long that he had finished the 9th song and was going to leave without paying, leaving it on their conscience. Seeing Min-cheol alone, he asked where the girl had gone, to which the guy replied that she had gone to the lavatory. Then the guy took a closer look at him and asked why his face was so red. Min-cheol looked away irritably and replied that it was because of drinking. The friend continued to regard the lad enigmatically, and then saying that perhaps his question wouldn't please him, asked what Min-cheol really thought of Haneul. The guy exhaled heavily because it was a really annoying question. He said he thought she was part of his family. The realization that he had just made out in a hickey with a close relative dumbfounded him. His actions could almost be considered incestuous. Min-cheol hid his face in his palms and began to mutter something about why he was doing this to her and that they shouldn't continue. His friend at this time covered his mouth with his hand in surprise and thought that he had hit the jackpot, for Min-cheol had drunkenly just blabbed such a secret. He thought the guy would tell him to back off with the stupid questions, but it turns out under the influence of alcohol, he was told the whole truth. The guy moved closer to Min-cheol and began to reassure him that there was nothing wrong with his feelings for Haneul. Asked if he was going to do anything about it. Min-cheol, without raising his head, dejectedly replied that he had no choice but to respect her decision and do as she wished. His friend looked at him incomprehensibly and said that if he tried to act, he would definitely be able to win the heart of Haneul. But the guy denied everything, saying that his friend does not understand. The guy couldn't stand it and shouted at Min-cheol, asking if he was always so stubborn. He said he had to confess his feelings to her, asking what the guy was so afraid of. Min-cheol exhaled heavily and shuddered, imagining the worst possible outcome. And then he lowered his head doomily and said the thing he was most afraid of was ruining their 20-year friendship. In the end, Min-cheol had to carry the sleeping Haneul on his back. The guy was shocked how she managed to get so drunk that she fell asleep in the washroom. He turned to the friend who had seen them off and said it was good to see him after all these years. The guy looked at the couple leaving and thought about the fact that these two definitely have feelings for each other. But both of them either don't want to admit it or just don't realize it, because they've been best friends for so long. If so, the moment of realization could be a challenge for them. Either way, he hoped they'd be okay. The white fluffy face meowed longingly and demanded attention. Haneul couldn't open her eyes. She felt lousy, but she couldn't even move to kick the cat off her chest. Gathering her strength at last, the girl walked into the kitchen. Her mother saw her and joked jovially that her daughter was a drunkard. The woman handed her a mug of warm water. The girl asked how she had got home. When she heard that Min-cheol had brought her home on his back, the girl almost choked up. She ran to her room and texted the guy right away. She asked if it was true that he brought her home on his back. Min-cheol, who was brushing his teeth at the time, texted, "Doesn't she remember last night?" The girl replied that she didn't remember anything that happened after she sang the song, asked if she was acting weird. The guy replied that she shouldn't worry, that she was acting like a clown as usual. Haneul thanked him and wished him a good holiday. She put the phone away and stared at the ceiling, exhaling. She knew she was being cowardly because she remembered how they had kissed yesterday. The girl covered her head tiredly with her hand. She realized that she had crossed the line with him a lot lately, but their communication seemed to be normal after what had happened. Haneul pondered the relationship they were in after having sex. Could they continue to be just friends? Because she really wanted to keep her friendship with him. She didn't know how she was going to be around him now or what she wanted to do with him. She felt a little sad. Min-cheol held the phone in his hands silently for a while. As he walked into the room, his gaze locked on their childhood photo together, and he thought about the fact that Haneul had always been so curious that she wanted to satisfy her curiosity right away. She happens to be interested in sex this time, and once her interest cools down, they'll go back to normal. The guy thought about it and came to the conclusion that eventually, when this was over, the girl might well apologize and say that she had just lost her mind. He sighed heavily and ruffled his hair. It was hard for him. It was hard to hide his real feelings and pretend he didn't care. But until she got sick of it, it was just a matter of holding on. The campus was very lively. There were students walking everywhere and fast food trucks standing around. The girls braided and gathered Lee Johan's hair. The boy mumbled his thanks nonchalantly. Lee Haneul laughed merrily. Her friend said that with this hairstyle, the guy would definitely win the competition. Lee Johan rubbed his neck and replied that their department was really lucky lately. The boys excited and were very enthusiastic. It was the first time that their department passed the qualifiers and made it to the finals. Their sunbae was really cool. Haneul and her friends began to encourage Lee Johan and say that he will definitely win. The guy started to feel uncomfortable because of the noise around him. He put his thumb up and said he was going to go out there and kick everyone's ass. Minji joked that with his hair like that, he doesn't look as cool as he imagines he does. A while later, the girls took a snack and came to the field, but froze with shock and indignation. They couldn't understand why the hell so many students were gathered here. The girls weren't sure if they would find somewhere to sit. Haneul wondered since when basketball became so popular. The girls began to look for the opposing team their department was competing against. Finally, they saw the guys from the business management department, and everything fell into place. The influx of people was because two of Uni's hottest guys were competing tonight. Seeing Min-cheol in the opposing team, Lee Johan groaned and sadly told Sunbae that it looks like today they will definitely not win. Jae-hee Sunbae asked if he was now going to run away. To which the guy replied that if he looked cute, he would stay, and the guys laughed. Sunbae turned and looked at the opposing team. He said that when it comes to basketball, you have to play to know the outcome. He saw the guy that Haneul is friends with and said that he looked like a pretty good player. Min-cheol, who felt that he was being looked at Jae-hee Sunbae with a challenge. The girls looked at the field and discussed by what score their department would lose. They didn't have even the smallest hope of winning. Minji looked carefully at Haneul's worried look and asked if she had decided which team she was going to cheer for. On one side was her department, and on the other side was Min-cheol. The girl folded her hands in a lock and brought them up to her face. She said she would pray that they would play injury-free. Min-cheol relaxedly drove the ball and once again threw it into the ring to the cheers of the crowd. As he once again approached basketball hoop, a familiar guy appeared in his path and smiled cheekily at him. Min-cheol very politely addressed him as Haneul Sunbae and asked him not to interfere with him and to get out of his way. Jae-hee laughed and said that the guy was very polite, but would not do that. He glowed with a smile and mockingly told the guy that he could affectionately call him young. Min-cheol threw back that he wasn't going to do that. Then the boy asked if he was really Haneul's childhood friend. He said that if that was the case, the guy should know the girl's interests and tastes, and then asked if he would tell him more about her. Min-cheol looked at him suspiciously and asked if he was really interested in this. Jae-hee Sunbae made a fake expression as if he was actually thinking about the guy's question, and then smirking looked at the guy and replied that he wasn't really interested. Min-cheol's gaze became cold and stern, and he was ready to snap at the lad. Suddenly, he took a step forward, pushed off, and threw the ball straight into the basketball hoop from behind the three-point line. Jae-hee Sunbae stared in the direction of the ball, and it was hard to believe that a guy in such a state hit the target. Min-cheol looked at him unkindly and said that if he wanted to provoke him, he should have tried to be more original. Jae-hee Sunbae admitted that his plan didn't work. Haneul and her friends went and listened to the outrage that their department had lost to the business management department by a score of 11 to 57. Now that the competition was over, they didn't know what to do with themselves. Minji, out of grief, offered to let the girl eat her portion too. Haneul didn't get upset at all and happily agreed to it. As they passed by, they saw Jae-hee Sunbae surrounded by a large number of people as usual. Whenever he participated in any events, he attracted a lot of attention because of his popularity. The guys decided to chat to him another time as he was busy now and went in search of a fast food machine. At this time, Jae-hee Sunbae sighed tiredly, and suddenly raising his head, his gaze caught on a familiar silhouette. He recognized Haneul. The guy laughed to himself that she walks around with a mouthful of food. Suddenly, the memory of what Min-cheol had said him about the provocation flashed through his mind, and a plan matured in his mind. Haneul complained that all the food courts around here were already closed and suggested we head to a cafe. Minji wondered how a girl could fit so much food in her stomach. Lee Johan offered to get back on the field and see who the business management department would play with next. Haneul thought about the fact that if she came back, she would have to watch Min-cheol again, but she couldn't think of anything interesting for them to do. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was Hye-soo, and her voice was ringing. She asked Haneul not to worry and said she had something to tell her. When she reported that Min-cheol had been taken to the police, Haneul froze with shock. This was not at all how she had planned to dispel boredom. Jae-hee Sunbae stopped when he heard a familiar voice call out to him. It was a friend of Haneul's. Min-cheol glared menacingly at him. The guy knew it would piss him off, so he smiled and said again that he could call him Hyung, to which Min-cheol again replied that he wasn't going to do that. He looked at the guy with suspicion and then asked if he was really interested in Haneul. Jae-hee Sunbae decided to tease him and smiled slyly like a Cheshire cat and said that it might be true. He lowered his head and said conspiratorially that Haneul is a very cute girl, and then added that that's one of the reasons Min-cheol likes her too. When the guy heard that, a shiver ran through his body. For a moment, his mind went blank, as if he'd been swept away into the astral. Then he pulled himself together and stammered, asking what the hell was that guy talking about. Jae-hee Sunbae smiled at the thought that he tried to provoke the guy again, but it didn't work. Then he replied that maybe he was really interested in Haneul. He waved goodbye to Min-cheol while he stood in a stupor and wished him a good game. At this time, one of his teammates called out to Min-cheol, but seeing the expression on his face, the guy froze. The guy asked which department the next game was against, and his friend, after some thought, replied that it would be the PE department. A short while later, Min-cheol and his teammates were eating sweets. The guys were discussing how the match with the physical education department might turn out. Suddenly, one of the guys told me that people around here are already betting on which faculty will win this game. He had heard people say with his own ears that Kim Min-cheol was in great physical shape, so the business management department had a good chance of winning. But the PE department had a good reputation as well. Min-cheol sipped his water and said that all these bets are meaningless. Personally, he only wanted to win. His friend as Bewitched told him that the president of the department promised to organize a celebratory dinner in a restaurant with pork brisket, so they have no right to lose. Suddenly, the guys overheard someone in the PE department being indignant about people betting on their game. The guy was angry and said they were crazy. How could they compare them to the jerks in the business management department? Min-cheol and his friend were sitting at the bottom of the stairs where the guys couldn't see them, so they could hear the whole conversation. One of the guys on the opposing team said it was all Min-cheol's fault. A lot of people know that he's a really good player, to which his fellow student jock roared that this guy is a regular punk and not even close to their guys. Seung-hyun smiled and said that his friend was absolutely right. Hearing his voice, Min-cheol turned his ears. He was sure he had heard that voice before recently. The guys kept talking about him. saying he acts like he's allowed to do anything just because he's tall. The jock guy was outraged. He started asking why Min-cheol was suddenly popular. If he looks like a pretty girl and has pale skin, is that considered beautiful? Min-cheol and his friend sitting in the shelter were holding back laughter. The big guy, meanwhile, went on to say that guys like Min-cheol go on blind group dates all the time and take the prettiest girls, so regular guys don't stand a chance. Seung-hyun laughed and told the guy to speak for himself because he personally had recently been on a group blind date recently. The guys were immediately enthusiastic and asked if there were any cute girls there and if he had managed to flirt with anyone. The guy smirked smugly. He said there were some really cute girls there. He personally managed to glue Kim Min-cheol's childhood friend together. When he heard that, the guy froze and finally realized why that voice sounded familiar to him. It was the same guy who had confessed to Haneul. One of the guys opened his mouth in surprise and couldn't believe it, asking if Seung-hyun had managed to glue Haneul herself together. Min-cheol's friend leaned over to him and grinned and remarked that his female friend was famous among the guys, despite the fact that he tried so hard to hide her. Suddenly, the guys heard one of the guys start asking Seung-hyun if the rumors about her figure are not lying, and if her shape is really so impressive. The jock stared at his friend incomprehensibly and asked what shapes he was asking about. The guy chuckled and put his palms together at his chest and started squeezing and unclenching them, saying that Haneul was famous for her huge breasts. Seung-hyun's voice was heard, and he replied that although he didn't get to see her naked, he could definitely tell that she had breasts larger than D size. The guys giggled and asked him how it went with her. Min-cheol froze at this point and anger coursed through his veins. The friend sitting next to him said that these guys were real bastards. Seung-hyun said that he called her home on the pretext of doing homework together. She either foolishly or naively went to his house, but then she ran away. So he gave up on her. He said she wasn't pretty enough for him to spend much effort on her. He thought it would be easy to have fun with her because she looked stupid. When Min-cheol heard this, he got to his feet and stopped taking responsibility for his actions. The guy was moving his feet up the stairs on automatic. As Seung-hyun continued to rant, his friends suddenly froze and were even a little frightened. The guy stared at his friends, not understanding what was happening to them. He didn't pay attention to the huge shadow looming over him. Suddenly, someone grabbed him by his t-shirt and turned him round sharply. When he saw Min-cheol's angry face, he only managed to mumble something inaudible. Before he knew it, the guy's fist was rushing towards his face. Haneul ran at full speed through the streets of the city towards the police station. When she heard that Min-cheol had been taken to the police, the girl assumed that someone had insulted him and he had started a fight. But Hye-soo interrupted her and said it wasn't like that. The girl said that Min-cheol witnessed Seung-hyun saying obscene things about Haneul to his friends from the PE department, so he fought with him. Haneul reached the police station in record time. Bursting inside, she immediately started shouting and looking for Min-cheol. When he saw her, the guy froze, looking like a delinquent child. The girl ran up to him and cradled his face in her palms, examining the abrasions. The guy screamed in pain, begging to be released. The girl kept wailing that if he had started a fight, he shouldn't have let himself be beaten up. He should learn to fight back. She demanded that he tell her where that bastard Seung-hyun was, and she would beat him up herself. Suddenly, there was a polite cough from a policeman who pointed his finger at a sign asking for silence, and the girl apologized. The man then pointed his finger in the direction, and Haneul followed him with a glance. She saw Seung-hyun sitting behind Min-cheol. There was no living space on his face, and he looked much worse than the guy she was just worried about. The girl lowered her hands and exhaled heavily. She realized that they seemed to be in trouble. Haneul approached the policeman and asked if they could go home since it was a mutual attack, and the guys came to an agreement. Seung-hyun shouted that an agreement was out of the question. He told her to take a closer look at his face. It was obvious he was the injured party. The guy was screaming that he was going to sue Min-cheol. The girl exhaled and adopted a nonchalant expression on her face. And then she suddenly swung round and hit him on the head so that the guy even bit his tongue. As she continued to whip Seung-hyun, Min-cheol sat quietly on the sidelines, afraid to get under her arm. The guy covered his head with his hands and moaned, asking what the girl was beating him up for. Haneul stated that she heard what he was telling his mates, and if he had any conscience, he wouldn't be asking what he's getting for now. Seung-hyun stared at the girl with shame and horror. He had nothing to say, as if he had swallowed his tongue. Haneul clenched her fists and looked at him angrily. She wondered if she should voice all the nasty things he had said about her. And then she added that if he went to court, she'd countersue him for sexual harassment. Seung-hyun felt ashamed and realized that he would not win this argument, so he silently lowered his head. The girl looked at the guy with disappointment for a while longer. Then she said he should be ashamed. He so boastfully said nasty things about her, and now he's even embarrassed to look into her eyes. She exhaled and told Min-cheol that they were leaving. They crouched down in front of the police station, and Haneul grumblingly started treating the lad's wounds. The guy's face was covered in abrasions and scratches, but he silently endured while the girl pecked plasters on his wounds. Haneul reprimanded him for still acting like a child and not being able to restrain his aggressive temperament. Min-cheol interrupted her and asked if she was okay with them just leaving this guy alone after all the nasty things he'd said about her. The girl thought about it and replied that if he had continued to scandalize, she might actually have sued him. But since he was embarrassed and couldn't say anything else, she decided to just forget about him and never think about it again. She admitted that the situation was a real lesson for her, and she's glad they didn't have anything. She managed to tell him everything she wanted to say, so she's happy. Then Haneul suddenly became furious and started berating the guy for actually overreacting. She said he shouldn't have gotten into a fight. He can't solve problems through violence all the time. He beat him up in the middle of campus and didn't even think about the fact that this guy could actually sue him. The guy pretended not to listen to her, covering his ears with his fingers. The girl was upset by the fact that in addition to this, there were a large number of people who do not know the whole situation, and now the university will again spread rumors about her and Min-cheol. Min-cheol said he doesn't care what rumors are circulating about them. The girl was offended by this and shouted, asking how he could say that. The guy was embarrassed and turned away, saying that the girl listens to all these rumors, but only she is important to him and she knows the truth. Hearing those words, Haneul froze and felt something in her chest tighten up. Sometimes there are cases when a person suddenly realizes that among his good friends and people he has known for a long time, there is someone who is absolutely ordinary for others, but absolutely irreplaceable and dear to him. Unimaginable. But looking at this guy now, Haneul felt exactly that feeling. The girl who perceived Min-cheol as part of her family suddenly felt something blossom in her chest. And she wondered why, among so many people, he was the one who was now by her side. While the girl was completely absorbed in her thoughts because of the shock, the guy reached out to her and touched her shoulder, trying to bring her back to him. Haneul regarded his handsome face and big, strong arms, barely hearing him ask why she was staring at him. Experiencing an unfamiliar, pleasant feeling, the girl finally guessed what had happened to her. She blushed ear to ear and realized that her first love had caught up with her. The next day, the girl was styling her hair and still couldn't believe she had fallen in love with her best friend. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and asked herself if she was wrong or just going crazy. Remembering Min-cheol's face and how he had admitted that she was more important to him than the others, the same feelings came over the girl. She blushed and realized that she had fallen in love with him after all. She was embarrassed to even look at herself, so she dropped to her knees, holding onto the sink, and tried to regain her breath. She thought it was something very strange and embarrassing that she had fallen in love with her best friend. She had always seen him as an annoying little brother, but why had he suddenly become so attractive and sexy in her eyes? Finally, she stood up and took a deep breath to try to calm herself down. She looked at herself in the mirror and decided that she needed to somehow seduce Kim Min-cheol. The girl started to look at herself and thought that she didn't know what the guy thought of her, but since they slept together, at least her body attracted him. She spun round in front of the mirror and couldn't decide whether she could seduce a guy or not. Minji, reading a magazine, heard crying and screaming for help from the bathroom. Bursting in there, she saw Haneul sitting on the floor with her head leaning against the wall. The girl thought she had fallen and hit her head. Haneul looked at her friend with eyes full of tears and asked for her help. The next day, the girls went shopping where Minji helped Haneul pick out some new outfits. The girl never ceased to be amazed at how her friend managed to combine things in such a great way. She admired Minji's style every time. The girl replied that fashion was something she was really interested in. She explained that when a person is obsessed with something and is constantly thinking about something they are interested in, eventually they become much better at it. Haneul thanked her friend for her help and admired her once again. In turn, the girl wondered why her friend suddenly decided to buy new clothes, because she had never been interested in shopping before. Haneul panicked. She didn't want to tell her friend that she wanted to make herself pretty for Min-cheol. She looked away and said that she just wanted to buy some things for autumn. Minji pretended to be satisfied with that answer. She realized that her friend's eagerness to update her wardrobe had something to do with Min-cheol. Haneul spent a long time tidying herself up in front of the mirror. She put on her new skirt and worried if it would look too short. Then she glanced at her phone and decided it was time to text Min-cheol and invite him to have lunch together. Her finger hovered over his contact, but the girl still couldn't make up her mind to text him. At the mere thought of them meeting and being alone together, her heart raced and she was gripped by panic and fear. She couldn't understand what was happening to her, because they used to have lunch together every day. While she was nervous and trying to pull herself together, her phone rang. It was Min-cheol's mother, the girl wondering what she might need since she was calling her. Soon, Haneul came running to the guy's flat and happily said hello to his mom. The woman greeted her cheerfully. The girl was surprised that Auntie had traveled so far to see them, as they were going to come home this weekend themselves. The guy's mother replied that she had business nearby, so she stopped by to drop off some goodies and told the girl to stay and be sure to eat. She then said angrily that Min-cheol had not returned her calls all day. They were about to agree on how they would punish him for such behavior, when suddenly the guy appeared in the doorway and tiredly exhaled, saying that he was finally home. His mother immediately took to her heels and began to reprimand her negligent son. Min-cheol, who had not expected to see her, was dumbfounded, while Haneul laughed at him. The woman grumbled and went to the kitchen and told her son to help set the table. Haneul quietly asked him why he wasn't answering his mother's calls. The guy ducked down and whispered that he'd tell her a little later. Seeing that the girl didn't understand, he moved closer to her and whispered in her ear that he would tell her everything when his mother left. As soon as Haneul felt his breath against her ear, she immediately flushed red and her skin covered in goosebumps. Min-cheol went off to help his mother, leaving Haneul to burn with embarrassment. After lunch, the woman said she was leaving. Haneul was sad that Auntie had spent so little time with them, but the woman had plans of her own. Min-cheol's mother wished them a good evening, then turned round and said with a smile that if they would board, they should go into the guest bedroom. The woman had found something interesting and had left it there for them to see. The young people stared at her incomprehensibly. When they got into the room, they found a whole bunch of their old photos. Haneul was surprised to find so many of them. Turns out Min-cheol's grandmother collected all their photos. There were even pictures of their newborns. Snatching one of the photos, Haneul smiled and told the boy to look at it. She asked if he remembered why she had cried. Min-cheol laughed and replied that she loved to swim in the sea, and she was very upset when it turned out that they had come on holiday in the valley. In the next photo, they were standing together at the temple, and Haneul assumed it was a photo from a school trip, but then asked if they were in the same class. To which the guy replied that they were in different classes, and this photo was taken during their family picnic. Another photo showed they sitting together in the dining room, and the girl was again surprised at how many memories they had. She said it was a photo from the middle school entrance ceremony. Min-cheol corrected her again, saying that this photo was taken after the second semester of middle school because she had a short haircut in their freshman year. Haneul was a little upset that, unlike her friend, she had forgotten so much. She asked how he could remember everything in such detail. Suddenly, the conversation with Min-ji came back to her mind. She suddenly realized that he was always watching her closely and being affectionate. Min-cheol was the only one who knew her deeply. The girl suddenly lowered her head and hid her flushed face. She tried to convince herself that she was wrong, or she would be in big trouble. She couldn't believe that Min-cheol could think of her that way. She was probably just going crazy. Her musings were interrupted by a light touch on her cheek. Min-cheol touched her and asked anxiously if she was feeling well. Haneul looked at him, and it was as if she was seeing him for the first time. She couldn't remember if he had always looked at her that way and why she hadn't noticed before. At the sight of his handsome and worried face, the girl exhaled and realized she was lost. She pulled him by his t-shirt and kissed him. Min-cheol's body trembled with surprise. Haneul suddenly thought that they had kissed only drunkenly before, and she had never seen Min-cheol's face properly at those moments. Now she wanted to see it. She shivered and saw that the guy's face was red and he was horny and embarrassed. The girl could not accurately describe her emotions. Haneul sat on Min-cheol's lap and continued kissing him. Both of them were passionate. The guy wondered where it had come from all of a sudden, why the girl had suddenly kissed him. Suddenly, he pulled away from her and tried to move away, but the girl didn't want to stop. Then he asked her to let him catch his breath. Though he really wanted to continue, he had to ask her for sure. Min-cheol was embarrassed and looked her straight in the eye. The guy wondered if the girl really intended to do it to him again. After a few long seconds of silence, sweat ran down his back. He was afraid of her answer. Haneul enthusiastically replied that she would like that if he had nothing against it. The girl mentally reprimanded herself for making her joy so obvious. Min-cheol sighed heavily and covered his face with his hand, trying to collect his thoughts. Then he asked again if the girl was doing it out of pure curiosity and nothing more. The girl was a little embarrassed because at first it had been like that, And even though it was different now, she couldn't admit it to him, so she answered that he was right. The guy's face became sad for some reason, and he mumbled that he thought so. Haneul didn't realize the contradictory feelings that were tearing him apart at the moment. Min-cheol took her hand and stroked it, asking the girl not to feel awkward around him after everything that would happen. He continued to hold her hand, afraid to let go and afraid to say that he couldn't bear it if she decided to distance herself from him again. Haneul was pleased that the guy didn't mind and happily agreed. Suddenly, the girl grabbed his hand and brought it to her breast. The guy instantly flared up and became embarrassed. Trying to remove his hand, he asked why the girl did it. Haneul looked at him incomprehensibly. She thought he liked her breasts and couldn't understand his reaction. She looked up at him with her already big eyes and gently asked if he wanted to touch her. Min-cheol stared at her, thinking she was asking if he minded. He had a chance not to cross that line again, but seeing that look in her eyes, he sent everything to hell. After a while, the young people switched off all the lights and closed the curtains. But the room was still embarrassingly bright. So the girl sat with her back to the guy so she wouldn't be embarrassed. Soon their clothes were lying on the floor. The young Pelpe relaxed and gave in to their feelings again, spending the night together. After that, the girl fell asleep and didn't wake up until late at night. She got up in bed and looked around, but she didn't see Min-cheol anywhere. As she left the room, she saw a soft light pouring in from the kitchen. She saw a guy standing at the cooker cooking ramen. Min-cheol smiled at her and asked if she was hungry. Haneul was still sleepy, but said she would eat and asked for ramen and egg. Soon, the young people sat down at the table and the guy gave the girl a rubber band for her hair, so that it would not interfere with her meal. The girl thanked him and started to gather her hair. She glanced at the guy and thought that he looked hot even while he was eating. She dropped her head on the table and groaned doomfully. The girl then stood up and started eating ramen. She thought about how things had been easier in her childhood and seemed to know Min-cheol much better then. It felt like she hadn't known her friend at all since they'd gone to university. Haneul suddenly remembered that she never found out why the guy wasn't answering his phone and asked what he was doing busy with. Min-cheol chewed and told her that nothing serious had actually happened. The department president was reprimanding him for causing their department to lose the basketball competition. The girl listened to him carefully and said that she was sorry that his department lost. Then she began to reprimand him, telling him that he should learn to control his anger because such situations can lead to unexpected spending of money. To which the guy replied that this month he would really have to save money because of paying the fine. Haneul was surprised. She asked what he spends the money on since his part-time job pays him quite well. The guy continued eating and nonchalantly replied that he was saving most of the money he earned, but he wouldn't tell what for. The girl suddenly thought the idea of a part-time job sounded tempting. It's Min-cheol's birthday in December, and if she gets a job now, she'll have time to raise money for a nice present for him. Haneul brightened with joy at her cleverness. She grinned slyly and began rubbing her hands together. The guy stared at her and asked her what she was grinning about, the sight of her scaring him. Haneul smiled broadly and announced that she had decided to take a part-time job. She decided that if she confessed to him out of the blue, he'd probably get flustered. So she will gradually seduce him over the next 2 months, and on his birthday, she will give him a present and confess her feelings to him. The girl was pleased with herself and thought it was a great plan. After 2 weeks, the girl finally found a part-time job. But her work colleague was a bit prejudiced against her. She'd definitely seen this girl before, but she couldn't remember where. Jae-hee Sunbae was standing around the corner of the hotel talking on the phone. He took a drag and leisurely exhaled a cloud of smoke. The guy said he was busy with his hobby and had to get back to his companion. Stepping out of the lift, he finished speaking and headed for the room. When the guy came into the room, he said with a smile that he was back. The girl was lying on the bed with her hands bound and a mask over her face. He asked if she had behaved well while he was away. Jae-hee Sunbae crouched on the edge of the bed and the girl moaned, asking to be untied. The guy smiled as usual and reached out to lift the mask from her eyes. The girl's cheeks flushed red and tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. But she didn't say a word against it. The guy praised her, saying she did well and he'd untie her for it. As soon as the rope fell to the floor, the girl threw her arms round the guy's shoulders and, smiling seductively, said that since she had done her part well, she deserved the reward. She pulled him to her and kissed him lightly. Jae-hee Sunbae immediately took the initiative and started kissing her harder, biting her lips. Soon he had the girl's legs over his shoulders and was moving at a very fast pace. The guy was so insatiable that the girl started asking him to stop for a while. He froze and looked at her. Tears were streaming from her eyes and she felt uncomfortable. The guy ran his palm over her face, wiping them away. A manic smile appeared on his face, and he declared that the girl was a real pretty. The girl came out of the bathroom and wrapped herself in a large dressing gown. She climbed onto the bed and saw that Jae-hee Sunbae was texting some girl. She could see the name Lee Haneul. The girl took a closer look and wondered. Then she suddenly said that lately the guy's been hanging out with this girl a lot. He smiled and said he was. The girl felt a prick of jealousy and asked if he had some kind of relationship with this girl too. Jae-hee Sunbae looked at her and replied with a smile that it was nothing like that. She was just his younger friend from university. The girl went on to ask if all of his friends from university he hangs out with so much. The guy once again laughed and said she shouldn't be jealous and stroked her face, saying that her eyes were a little swollen from crying. The show of concern improved her mood a little, but she said in a low voice that the guy had masterfully changed the subject. Then she flopped down on the bed and covered herself with a blanket, saying that he himself is always teasing her until she starts crying, so his concern is fake. The guy smiled and said he couldn't deny it, but he was really worried about her well-being. Jae-hee Sunbae thought about it and said that he really doesn't like to see anyone cry. Then he pictured in the place of the girl crying today, the face of Haneul lying on the bed with disheveled hair and eyes full of tears. And after experiencing some sick pleasure, he grinned and said that maybe he liked it after all. On her first day at work, Haneul said hello to her new colleague, but ran into her scratchy gaze and couldn't understand why the girl was staring at her like that. She said a polite hello and bowed and asked the girl to take care of her. But the girl remained silent and stared at her displeased. The girl gazed into Haneul's face and recognized her. She remembered her avatar in the chat room on Jae-hee's phone, and it was the same girl he was always chatting with. The feeling of jealousy flared up in her again. She turned round without answering and said that since she was hired, she had a rough idea of what to do. But if she had any questions, she could ask them. Haneul thought the girl was very pretty and slim, something similar to Minji, only a little rougher. But the feeling that she'd seen her somewhere else never left her. All day, Haneul made mistakes at work and was admonished by the girl for it. She couldn't punch a cashier's check, almost burned the cupcakes, and ruined a regular iced coffee. Eventually, the girl couldn't stand it and started scolding her. She said that Haneul was completely incompetent, as if it was her first time working. The girl lowered her head guiltily and admitted that this was her first job, but she promised that she would try to learn everything as soon as possible. Her colleague was surprised and even felt sympathy for her. She exhaled tiredly and mumbled that she was going to have to fiddle with it. Haneul raised her head and apologized again. Seeing the girl in profile, she finally remembered where she'd seen her. It was the same girl who had a fight with Jae-hee Sunbae and slapped him. Haneul opened her mouth in astonishment and shouted loudly. She told the girl that she was the one who punched Jae-hee Sunbae in the face. The girl was embarrassed and asked what she knew about it. Haneul gave her a friendly smile and asked if she was his girlfriend. When the girl heard this, she had a good feeling that she and Jae-hee Sunbae looked like a couple, and blushing, she asked if it was true that she looked like his girlfriend. Haneul stared at her with incomprehension and then asked if they were in a relationship. The girl was embarrassed and blushed and said it wasn't quite that. Then Haneul said interestedly that they were in a situationship. But the girl blushed even more and hesitated, trying to explain that she was the only one who had feelings so far. Haneul covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes lighting up with sympathy and understanding. It turned out that this girl was going through a phase of unrequited love too. Suddenly, she took her hands in hers and enthusiastically said that she would be rooting for her, and was sure that she and Jae-hee Sunbae would work things out for sure. The girl bounced away from Haneul in amazement, not realizing what she cared about any of this. She couldn't understand why the girl was acting so openly. She's been scolding her all day, criticizing her, and this girl is so sweet and genuinely concerned for her. She felt embarrassed at her behavior. She even thought for a moment that Haneul might be a little stupid. Haneul wanted to ask why she punched the guy in the face, but the girl had already turned around and told her to keep working. At noon, there was such an influx of customers in the cafe that the girls were just falling off their feet. The girl breathed heavily and looked at Haneul, who was standing there smiling, and said that it was good to be young. She was full of vigor. Haneul smiled tiredly and replied that their age difference wasn't that big. Then suddenly the girl asked why she had taken a part-time job. For the experience or to save money? Haneul got a little embarrassed and replied that she wanted to save up money to buy something. She confessed that there's a guy she's in love with and she wants to give him a nice present. The girl stared at her skeptically and thought that it was rare to meet such an open and innocent person. She didn't even want to ruin her childhood fantasies. She told Haneul that if she starts dating this guy now that she's 20 years old, their relationship won't last long anyway. Haneul said that they are childhood friends, and all her life she saw him as a little brother until she recently saw him as a man. She asked how the girl met Jae-hee Sunbae since they went to different universities. The girl said they met at a mutual friend's party and just started chatting. She kept quiet about the fact that the guy warned her right away that he wasn't looking for a relationship, and they became just friends with privileges. She said she feels embarrassed when she compares their situations. The girl stood up and said that starting a relationship with friendship is much easier and asked how long they've been friends for. Haneul replied that they have been friends since birth and began to tell their story. The girl listened to her carefully and at the end said in amazement that such friendship was a real rarity. She had never met people like these two before. Then she thought about it and said that it might be hard for them to start dating because of their friendship over the years. Haneul looked at her frustratedly, her enthusiasm plummeting dramatically. The girl hurried to calm her down and told her that she had also once had a relationship with a neighborhood boyfriend. But it was a long time ago and she doesn't even remember what he looks like anymore. She said it's a common occurrence, so it's normal for Haneul to fall in love with her childhood friend. While the girls were absorbed in their conversation, her friends entered the coffee shop noisily and cheerfully greeted her. Haneul smiled and was glad they had come to her. The guys wanted to see where she worked. A colleague came up to her and asked if they were from the same university, and the girl said they were all from the same department. Hee-soo asked if they were entitled to a free meal as her friends, to which the girl replied that they shouldn't even think of such a thing. As Haneul escorted her friends to their table, the girl said she would take an order from one of them. One of the guys stared at her and smiled, asking if they'd seen each other before. The girl looked at him skeptically and replied that he didn't know how to pick up girls. The guy fell silent and asked only for a latte. Lee Yohan came up next to place an order. For some time, the young people regarded each other in silence. The girl smirked and asked if he would be as likely to try to ineptly hit on her as his friend had been. Lee Yohan replied that he was studying the menu, and the girl seemed to have mixed syndrome. She blushed red from hearing that. The guy calmly placed his order. The girl at this time felt as awkward as possible because of her overconfidence. When Haneul passed by her, the girl said that she didn't like this guy with the ponytail. But friend rushed to assure her that he was a very nice guy. After a while, Haneul brought her friends their orders. Suddenly, Minji asked if the girl had received an invitation to the group chat room. She told her that it was a chat for the senior school reunion night at the end of semester. Haneul stared at her friend in surprise. The students slowly began to fill the audience. Suddenly, a friend came up to Min-cheol and said that he had been skipping class less often lately and was seen less often with Haneul, asking if they were doing well. Min-cheol irritably replied that she'd started working part-time, so she'd been busy a lot lately. The friend joked to him that his legs were shaking from worrying about the girl. Min-cheol gnawed his nails nervously and stomped his foot. The guy couldn't believe he was so worried about the girl. It was just a part-time job. But Min-cheol replied that of course he was worried about her, because she had probably already broken or damaged something. She's a walking disaster. Soon, a friend said that the phone was vibrating this time, and the guy pulled it out to look at it. It turned out that he was added to the group chat of the high school reunion, where the guys were actively chatting and making arrangements to meet up. At the same time, one of his former classmates was also reading this chat. A carefully manicured finger clicked on Haneul's avatar and began flipping through the photos. Reaching the photo with Min-cheol, the girl brought his face closer. She smirked sneakily and thought they hadn't seen each other in a while, but that would change soon. Kim Min-cheol was completing another lap of running around the stadium. Sweat dripped down his face. His head cleared of unnecessary thoughts. Suddenly, his leg cramped up and the guy stopped, trying to regain steady breathing. When he got home, he took a shower and began to dry his wet hair with a towel. He felt discomfort again, this time in his shoulder. He rubbed and tried to stretch the aching spot. The guy started to get dressed and thought that today his whole body was aching and old injuries were making themselves felt. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. He opened the general chat room and saw that Haneul had written that she was going to make sure to come to the high school reunion. The guy immediately imagined how she could get drunk in there and lose control. So he texted straight away that he was coming too. He couldn't let her go there unsupervised. Haneul at this time was lying at home listening to music and excited to see all her school friends soon. Haneul stood behind the counter and turned to her friend and said that he had been coming to her workplace too often lately. Lee Yohan replied that the drinks at this place are delicious and then laughed and said, except for the ones Haneul makes. The girl didn't take offense at the joke, just said she wouldn't treat him again. The boy suddenly looked at her attentively and then called out softly. He asked her the name of the girl she was working with. She said her name was Yuna. Lee Johan looked at the girl thoughtfully, running her name through his mind. Haneul suddenly became excited, put her hands together, and asked if he liked this girl. But Lee Johan didn't answer anything and stood up and walked over to Yuna to place an order. The guy said hello and called the girl a Nuna with princess syndrome again. Yuna stood wiping glasses and grumbling that she didn't like the guy. She complained to Haneul that he was acting like a kid from primary school, to which the girl replied that he was actually a nice guy. Just for some reason, he enjoyed making fun of her. Then Haneul suddenly asked if Yuna could suggest a good place to go with her friend. The girl immediately smiled and conspiratorially asked if she was planning a date. Haneul flashed with embarrassment. She ranted that it wasn't a date. They were just spending time together like they usually do. If she treats it like a date, she'll feel insecure. Yuna pinched the girl's cheek. She put her face close to the girl's and asked if she wanted to start dating this guy. Haneul rubbed her cheek and said that she wanted. The girl said that in that case, she should not behave as usual, but make him look at her differently. She kept saying that Haneul should dress prettier than usual and initiate body contact with him more often. The girl wondered if what they were doing with Min-cheol counted as close enough contact. Haneul got dizzy from the amount of advice. Yuna looked at the girl and wondered if she was ready for a relationship. The girl thought she should start dating soon. Then Jae-hee Sunbae would stop being interested in her. Suddenly, she declared that she will make a love talisman for Haneul. She reached for a stack of napkins. Yuna began to fold a figure out of a napkin and said that it was popular to make such talismans when she was at school. If you fold it in such a way as to make a heart, it will definitely bring good luck. But it's better to make it out of paper. Haneul was so touched and pleased, said it was very nice. Lee Johan, who was sitting not far away from the girls at the time, mentally went back in time after hearing Yuna's story. Little Johan was riding on a swing with a friend when she asked him to look at something. She told him that if you fold origami in the shape of a heart and put your love in it, such a talisman will definitely bring good luck and love. The girl then held out the paper heart to the boy with a radiant smile. Lee Johan abruptly stood up from the table and caught the girl's hand. It was definitely her. He couldn't be mistaken. Yuna stared at the guy apprehensively and asked what the hell he was doing. When she heard his quiet voice, the girl froze. The guy raised his head and looked into her eyes, hopefully asking if she was his mate, Nunamihi. Min-cheol was standing in an underground station when he heard a girl call his name. She ran towards him so fast she almost ran into him. Haneul teased him by saying he wasn't humanly flexible. The guy turned around and said she was being ridiculous, but stopped talking halfway through. The girl looked unaccustomedly cute today, wearing a short dress and light makeup. He noticed that she stood a little embarrassed by his gaze. She said he came earlier than usual, to which the guy replied that he always comes earlier than her. There was the sound of a train approaching. Min-cheol turned round and said it was time for them to head for the platform. The girl looked after him and didn't understand why he didn't notice that she wore a dress today. She had spent a lot of time today to look nice. Looks like her attempt to dress prettier than usual has failed. Meanwhile, Min-cheol was trying to keep his composure, wondering why the girl suddenly wore a dress to meet him. She looked very pretty. The young people traveled in silence on the train, and Haneul contemplated the scenery outside the window. The guy studied the girl. Then he decided to break the silence. He asked how her part-time job was going. The girl enthusiastically began to tell him how much she had learnt. And when the guy laughed and asked if she had broken anything yet, Haneul freaked out and asked who he even thought she was. Then, remembering that she'd burned several batches of cupcakes, she added quietly that she hadn't broken anything. Suddenly, she started telling the guy that something absolutely incredible had recently happened at their cafe. Min-cheol said he was interested to hear it. Haneul asked if he remembered Lee Johan. The guy replied that he was the guy from her department who looked like a monk, to which the girl replied in the affirmative, only adding that he wasn't really a monk. And then she started talking about what happened the other day. After Lee Johan gave the girl's real name, she looked at him in a panic and asked, "Who the hell is he?" She stared at the bloke who stood staring at her inexplicably, unable to utter a word. Then she abruptly threw up her hand and lifted his fringes, examining his forehead. For a few long seconds, she froze when she saw that familiar scar above his left eyebrow, and then shrieked and asked if he was really the same Johan. She couldn't believe it was true. Haneul, who was watching the unfolding scene, covered her mouth with her hand. She couldn't believe it. It looked like Lee Johan was the childhood friend Yuna had told her about. The guy at this time looked at his childhood friend in shock and couldn't believe what was happening until the end. Yuna took his trembling hand away and said that he had grown so tall and that she didn't believe it was really him. Lee Johan hovered over the counter and wrapped his arms around the girl, enclosing her in his embrace. Yuna, who had not expected such a thing, immediately burst out in shame. The guy hugged her so tightly and desperately that he didn't hear her pleas to wait and let her go for a while. He only inhaled her scent frantically. Then he nuzzled into her neck and said quietly that he missed her very much. The girl was even more embarrassed when she heard that. Telling this story, Haneul was so disturbed. It's such a touching story. He girl asked Min-cheol if it wasn't so wonderful to find her childhood friend and first love after so many years. She admitted that it was the first time she had seen Johan behave like that with anyone. Suddenly, the train doors opened and a crowd of people rushed inside. Haneul had to press her body very tightly against Min-cheol's chest so the guy could feel her every curve. They both felt embarrassed. The guy felt how soft and warm she was and immediately felt a rush of excitement. The girl liked this close proximity to him, but she was shy with people. Then it dawned on her that she had managed to fulfill the clause about initiating bodily contact. Although it was risky, she decided to look up to see his reaction to this closeness, but found him staring completely indifferent and detached expression on Min-cheol's face. Haneul turned away feeling resentful of the guy for being so indifferent. Min-cheol chanted the Korean national anthem to himself to calm himself down. Soon, the young men found themselves in Mangbang. Min-cheol looked around and asked why she had chosen this particular place. Haneul smiled and said that she was recommended this place because the kimchi fried rice here is delicious. In fact, the girl only came here for the individual cubicles, which everyone calls caves, in which you can freely seclude yourself. The girl was sure that when the two of them were alone in a confined space, a spark would run between them. But when Min-cheol tried to fit into one of these booths, he claimed they were not fit for normal people, and Haneul's plan failed. They ended up just sitting down at a vacant table and reading manga. Min-cheol suddenly said he had to step away for a while and got up from the table. While he was away, their order arrived. The food smelled so good and looked so good that the girl hurried to eat, but accidentally pushed her spoon on the floor. Just as the spoon flew to the floor, Min-cheol appeared and joked that the girl was trying to send the spoon back into the kitchen. The guy bent over for a spoon and said he'd go change it. He turned his head towards the girl, and suddenly his gaze went straight to her thighs. Suddenly, he stopped talking, stood up, and turned round without another word and hurried away. His whole face blazed with embarrassment. How could this crazy woman forget to wear undershorts? If she was going to cover up with a shirt, she should have done it properly. The sight of her underwear almost gave the guy a nosebleed. Lee Johan nonchalantly sipped his iced coffee while Yuna stood embarrassed behind the counter. There was a palpable tension in the cafe. The guy wouldn't take his eyes off her. The girl couldn't stand it anymore. She said that Haneul wasn't working today and asked why the hell the guy had come and was sitting here all day. But Lee Johan calmly replied that he knew that and had actually come to see her. The girl was surprised at such a frank answer and asked when he had managed to grow up to be so confident. Suddenly, the guy walked up to the counter and put his palms on it, saying that they hadn't seen each other for 10 years and he had changed in that time. Yuna decided to embarrass him and crossed her arms over her chest and asked if he had been and still was in love with her all this time. To which the guy didn't hesitate to reply that he was in love with her. The girl blushed, not expecting such a turn. Lee Johan scratched the back of his head and said he really should confess to her properly. He gently placed her palm in his and looked into her eyes and told her that he really have indecent desires toward to her and that he really did like her very much. Hearing such a thing, Yuna blushed and held her breath. She had never heard such words from anyone before. Haneul was sitting at a table enjoying the flavors and the sight of the food. She was already drooling when suddenly a blanket landed on her head. Min-cheol came back and told her to wrap her feet because the room was chilly. The girl was surprised but eventually agreed, and the guy thought he was lucky she was so naive. After having lunch, the young men sat quietly reading mangas. Haneul, as usual, got upset worrying about the main characters and tears came to her eyes. Min-cheol was amused by the look on her face. It had been a while since they had read together. Suddenly, the girl stood up and said she was going to the loo. Once in the toilet cubicle, the girl discovered she hadn't put on her undershorts, and suddenly realized that when Min-cheol bent over to get a spoon, he was likely to see her underwear. This made her blush with embarrassment. She came back to the table all nervous. Glancing at the bedspread, she wondered if the guy had given it to her on purpose so she could cover herself. His expression was impenetrable. She thought it was very nice of him. Suddenly, she wanted to tease him. Min-cheol was quietly reading the manga when he felt the girl gently start to stroke his foot with hers. He asked Haneul what she was up to and asked her to remove her foot, but the girl started teasing him and continued shoving him with her foot. Then the guy caught her foot with his fingers and squeezed it hard. The girl grabbed her leg and the guy laughed at her. She rubbed her aching leg and asked why he squeezed it so hard. She was fooling around. Min-cheol realized he'd overreacted and gave a guilty look on her face. He tried to continue reading but noticed that Haneul was not taking his eyes off him. Noticing that the girl was staring and then lowering her eyes, he asked irritably what was going on. Min-cheol saw that she was looking at him differently, as if afraid to say anything. He was embarrassed, not understanding why she was acting like she was embarrassed around him today. Haneul noticed a change in him and wondered why he avoided looking her in the eye. Both felt that something was going on between them, and both thought that maybe they liked each other. The girl plucked up courage and decided to ask him how he felt about her. At the same moment, Min-cheol decided to ask her a similar question, but they were distracted by a call telling them that their order was ready to be placed. The guy suddenly jumped up from his seat and announced that he'd ordered more food while the girl was leaving. When he brought the tray, the girl was surprised to realize that he had ordered all her favorite snacks. She thought about the fact that he had always been attentive and caring towards her. She just hadn't paid attention to it until a while ago and had taken it for granted. Though he had brought her a plaid and ordered her favorite goodies, she wasn't sure if he did it because he cared for her as a friend or because he liked her as a girl. Haneul decided not to jump to conclusions. The girl realized that their situation was not standard, so she had to be patient and not do anything stupid. As they sat in a restaurant later, the girl thought about the fact that if their relationship went to the next level, their friendship would end. So she realized that the guy might be cowardly about it, even though he was big and strong. Haneul decided that she would approach him slowly, step by step. Tired from the day and finally being outside, Min-cheol stretched and yawned. The girl was looking at him. When he shifted his gaze to Haneul, he noticed that she was looking at him with big, happy eyes. That look made him feel warm in his soul. The girl grabbed him by the edge of his t-shirt as if she didn't want to let go and said she hoped to see him tomorrow. Min-cheol was again surprised at how nice the girl was acting today. Haneul kept smiling and thought about hiding her feelings for a while. Soon after receiving her first salary, the girl came to the bookshop. As soon as she got the money, she wanted to buy something for herself and put the rest aside for Min-cheol's present. Finally, she saw the manga she had wanted for a long time, but it was on the top shelf and the girl stood on her toes trying to reach it. Suddenly, she felt someone's presence at her back, and a man's hand reached out and pulled out the volume she needed. Jae-hee Sunbae stood with a book in his hands and smiled sweetly as he said hello to her. The girl said hello to him and was glad to have such a chance encounter. While the guy was standing and smiling sweetly, the girl noticed that a little girl was clinging to his leg and looking at her intently. Haneul looked at the child, perplexed, to which the little girl suddenly asked proudly what it was the girl was staring at. Min-cheol was lying on the bed and still couldn't understand what had happened between them yesterday. He remembered how the girl had acted strangely, inviting him to meet up and go somewhere. At first, the guy thought that maybe she had feelings for him. But then he firmly dismissed the idea, because in his opinion, it was simply impossible. The guy turned onto his side and thought, what if by some miracle, she really does have feelings for him? Then he sighed heavily and thought that even if she liked him, there was something that was holding him back. If she were to be with him in the closest way, there would always be something that would keep him restless. Because every time he imagined her in his arms, imagining her laughing with him and calling his name, there came a moment when fear would overtake him. Min-cheol imagined the girl gloating and asking if he truly believed he deserved her. Had he really already forgotten what he had done to her? A sense of guilt and shame washed over him. He knew that she should hate him. The girl in his mind whispered to him that, although he pretended to care for her as a friend, in reality, his soul was filled with the desire to lock her away, to make her belong only to him. He tried to resist, fearfully convincing his mind that none of this was true, that he wasn't like that after all. The girl in his mind cried bitterly and asked, why then did he make that promise? Min-cheol woke up, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. He hadn't even realized when he had fallen asleep, and now he had had a nightmare. Meanwhile, Haneul, in the bookstore, stared at a little girl who looked very much like Jae-hee Sunbae. The girl clung tightly to his leg and, glancing at her from under her lashes, asked why she was staring so intently. Then she turned to the guy and called him uncle, asking him to hold her. Haneul stared at them in surprise. Jae-hee Sunbae picked the girl up in his arms and, ruffling her cheek, cheerfully said that she was his niece. The girl greeted the little one and enthusiastically said that she was very cute. But instead of greeting her, the little girl reached out her hand and tugged on Haneul's hair. The young man apologized for this, saying that his niece was still little and liked to grab something. The girl smiled and said that it was all right. She said that Sunbae looked great with the child, that it seemed very pretty. The guy smiled and replied that he often spends time with his niece since his sister works a lot. The little girl, Hae-won, looked at her uncle and said that she was hungry. The guy replied that in that case, they should go get something to eat. Haneul said that it was time for her as well, and they started saying their goodbyes. She said that she was glad to meet the little girl and had already turned around when she suddenly felt a small hand grab her hoodie. Hey. Won looked at her and suggested that she come have lunch with them. The girl didn't expect this and was left in confusion. Jae-hee Sunbae blushed and told his niece that Uni was busy, but the little girl persistently asked her to come with them. In the end, the girl couldn't refuse such a little cutie, and they all went out for lunch together. The guy felt awkward and thanked her for agreeing. The girl said that she was planning to have lunch anyway. Hae-won suddenly declared that her uncle would pay all the money, and the guy nodded, saying that he was treating them. Haneul became excited and started picking her food. She kept adding items one after another. She heard the guy call her name, and turning around, she asked if she was ordering too much. He laughed and said that he suspected she liked to eat, but he didn't expect it to be in such quantities. The girl said that since he mentioned he would pay, she decided to order more. The guy wiped away tears from laughing and replied that it was fine and that she could order whatever she wanted. Hae-won was staring intently at her uncle. Although she was small, she could tell that he was fond of the girl they had met. The young people took their seats at the table and sat in awkward silence. Finally, the little girl stared intently at Haneul, and suddenly she asked if Haneul was dating her uncle. The girl, taken aback, almost choked on her saliva. Jae-hee Sunbae smiled charmingly, propped his head up with his hand, and asked what she would answer to that question. Was she his girlfriend? He was clearly enjoying the situation. The girl gently patted the little one on the head and, smiling, replied that she was her uncle's hubei. She explained that she was a friend from university. The little girl asked curiously how they became friends despite the age difference and how they grew close. The girl thought for a moment and said that now, thinking about it, she couldn't remember when they became friends. The guy suggested that it might have been at a New Year's party. Haneul finally remembered that they became close after being in the same group during the MT. The guy smiled and said that he remembered now. Then, dreamily, he added that so much had happened since then. He thought to himself that it had already been a whole 6 months. It was the beginning of the semester, and the group leader asked if everyone had already arrived. Haneul and another first-year student were already there. Along with them, there were a couple of older students. They were all just waiting for Jae-hee Sunbae. Finally, the guy entered the classroom, and with a wide, friendly smile, he apologized for being late. His intrigued gaze met Haneul's eyes. That morning, the sound of the alarm clock woke Jae-hee Sunbae. The guy opened his eyes and tried to gather himself, still not fully awake. Then he got up and headed to the bathroom. Still feeling tired, he washed his face and wiped it with a towel. Then he looked at his reflection in the mirror and forced himself to put on a smile, trying to convince himself that this day wouldn't be as dull and meaningless as the previous ones. Entering the classroom, he kept smiling as usual and apologized for being late. To his surprise, some girl was staring at him intently. He was reprimanded for being late, but he just let out a forced laugh and said he was only a little late. His natural charm always helped him smooth over situations like this. He was introduced to the new first-year members of their group, and he greeted them with a warm smile. The newcomers were immediately struck by his friendliness and how genuinely pleasant he seemed. Haneul couldn't take her eyes off him and thought that his face practically radiated. She figured he must have been too busy, which was probably why they hadn't seen him before. The girl thought to herself that he was a real heartthrob and blushed, hoping he wouldn't start talking to her. Finally, the group leader said that every year, each group in their department had to produce and screen a short UCC at the MT. Then a vote is held, and the winning group receives a prize. She suggested starting by choosing a topic and asked if anyone had any ideas. While Haneul couldn't think of anything except for the handsome guy, her classmate hesitantly raised his hand and suggested, "How about a challenge?" But his idea was quickly dismissed, with someone saying it was too weak for the video design department. They needed to come up with something unique, something they could create. The guy blushed and began thinking hard. Haneul felt bad for her classmate, as it seemed to her that the girl had been a bit harsh with him. Though she was unsure of herself, she decided to try speaking up to the girl. But suddenly, a loud laugh from Jae-hee echoed through the room. He said that the girl sounded like she had broken down and was speaking in a funny way. He told the freshman not to pay attention to the tone in which the girl spoke, as she was upset because the professor had recently scolded her. But the girl got angry and said that the guy's idea was really useless, then asked if he had any ideas of his own. Haneul watched their argument unfold. The guy said that she had no right to demand something from the first-year students that she herself was unable to create, and suddenly an idea came to her. She raised her hand and nervously suggested, "How about a parody of a movie?" She suggested parodying a famous movie. The girl replied that it was a good idea and that once they decided on which movie to base it on, they could start filming soon. Everyone began praising her idea, and Haneul was clearly pleased with herself. Jae-hee Sunbae observed the girl closely and thought that she was showing her emotions a bit too openly. The next day, the guys arrived at the auditorium, which was filled with all sorts of equipment. At the sight of it all, the girl's eyes lit up with excitement. Suddenly, a guy appeared behind her and, leaning in slightly, asked if she had ever used a DSLR before. The girl was startled, but then replied that she hadn't had any experience with it yet. The guy then suggested that he could teach her. Hearing this, she was so happy that she couldn't believe her luck. She looked at the guy with her eyes shining brightly. Jae-hee Sunbae looked at her and thought that she was a bit strange, yet so genuine. He could see all the emotions on her face. Finally, they were called to the stage to begin setting up the equipment. The guy stared at her back for a while, unable to figure out who she reminded him of. Haneul darted around the stage, carrying out various small tasks. She wasn't afraid to take on any job. Jae-hee stood by the camera, unable to shake the feeling that this girl reminded him of someone. His classmate asked why he couldn't take his eyes off the first-year student, wondering if he was really that worried about her. The girl said that although she was a bit careless at times, she truly tried and did a lot of work. Therefore, he should focus too, so they could finish the shoot as soon as possible. The next day, Jae-hee Sunbae arrived early, not wanting to let the group down. But upon reading the messages in the group chat, he froze in place. Everyone wrote that they would be late, each with their own reasons. The guy sighed and thought to himself that he had a feeling something like this would happen. He suddenly noticed that Haneul was the only one who hadn't written anything, even though he had thought yesterday that she was very responsible. He decided that, in any case, he would wait for the others in the classroom. As he entered, he saw something that made him freeze once again. The girl was sitting alone in the dim light, chewing on a hamburger. When she saw him, she greeted him with her mouth full. The guy stared at her for a moment and then asked how long she had been sitting there. The girl seemed completely unbothered and, after chewing, replied that she had just arrived recently. She said she decided to arrive earlier and only then saw the messages in the chat. As he got closer, the guy noticed a pile of boxes of food in front of her and wondered if she would eat it all by herself. As if reading his mind, she said that she should eat it all before anyone else came. And then, suddenly, Jae-hee froze and finally realized who she reminded him of. She resembled a small, cute hamster. The girl was quick and a bit scatterbrained, easily startled, and ate a lot. Realizing this, the guy started laughing loudly and genuinely, even dropping to the floor on all fours. The girl asked if he was okay. Haneul continued chewing, her mouth full, and her cheeks really did look like a hamster's. The guy caught his breath, wiping the tears from his laughter, and replied that he was fine. He said that the others would be late, but they could start working in the meantime, and the girl agreed. Later, the guy realized why he had suddenly become so interested in her, why he kept searching for her gaze, and why he laughed at the most ordinary things when they met. But that would be later. Haneul thanked him for the delicious lunch and promised that next time she would treat him. Jae-hee smiled and said that he had enjoyed spending time with her and had fun. The girl said goodbye and mentioned that it was time for her to return to the dorm, while the boy and his niece cheerfully waved her off. For a while, he stood and watched her leave. A content and joyful smile appeared on his face. Suddenly, Haewon called out to him and asked if he was in love with that girl. He patted the little girl on the head and asked her why she thought that. The little girl simply replied that the way he looked at Haneul was very similar to how her mom looks at her dad. Hearing this, the guy was very surprised and fell silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He asked his niece if it was true that he had been looking at the girl with that kind of gaze. When the little girl nodded in agreement, the guy looked in the direction where the girl had already disappeared. It was surprising to him. He couldn't imagine that he had fallen in love. December arrived. In one of the dorm rooms, there was a loud crash. The guy nervously glanced at his friend. Min-cheol jolted awake in his sleep and hit his head on the top bunk. His friend asked if he was okay, mentioning that he had been tossing and groaning in his sleep, probably due to a nightmare. Rubbing his eyes and massaging his forehead, Min-cheol asked why his friend didn't wake him up. The guy replied that he was afraid Min-cheol might hit him in his sleep. He asked if he often had nightmares and if there were any ghosts in his house, as recently he had been spending too many nights at the dorm. While his friend continued talking about how they were invited to drink, the guy's phone rang, and he saw that it was Haneul calling. Meanwhile, Minji entered the cafe, shivering from the cold, and apologized to the group for being late. The friends greeted her warmly and said she arrived just in time, as they were still deciding on the location for their final assessment. Haneul waved cheerfully at her friend from behind the counter and cheered her up. The group was discussing how most of the scenes had already been filmed at the university, but they still needed to shoot the scenes involving an old house. The options suggested by the studios didn't seem very convincing, and they weren't sure what to do next. Minji suggested replacing the scene with the old house, but they responded that if they did that, the entire concept and atmosphere of their film would be lost. Haneul overheard her friend's conversation with one ear and heard that they had nowhere to shoot the scene in the old house. And then an idea popped into Haneul's head. She called out to them and said that she thought she might be able to help. The group got excited, but Haneul said that she would first need to make some arrangements with someone before confirming anything. She approached Yuna and asked for a short break so she could make a call to someone. Without turning around, the girl agreed and continued with her work. Lee Johan watched her carefully and noticed that she seemed to be upset about something. Soon, Haneul returned and cheerfully announced that she had managed to solve their problem. She explained that Min-cheol lives in an old house and agreed to let them use it for filming next week. Minji gave her friend a tight hug as a gesture of gratitude. Haneul also mentioned that the guy would likely stay over at his friend's place that day, so if they needed to stay late, the house would be completely available for them. The guy was very grateful for her help and promised that they would definitely treat her and Min-cheol to something later on. But suddenly, a stern voice of Yuna was heard. She scolded Haneul for slacking off and avoiding her work. Haneul apologized and quickly ran off to work, saying that she would go tidy up the storage room. Her friends were embarrassed because they felt that it was because of them that the girl got scolded. In fact, Yuna was in a bad mood because something unpleasant had happened the day before. She met with Jae-hee Sunbae, and the guy said something that broke her heart. He sat across from her, casually eating a cookie. In a matter-of-fact tone, he told her that he wanted to end their relationship. The girl was taken aback and, in desperation, asked what had happened, why he had suddenly decided to end everything. Jae-hee looked away and said that it wasn't about her. He added that, in fact, something like this had never happened to him before. He was nervous and said that he hadn't fully figured out his own feelings yet, but it seemed like he had met a girl who genuinely interested him. Yuna nervously fidgeted with her fingers under the table. Her heart skipped a beat. Although she had agreed to this kind of relationship with him, she had hoped that over time he would fall in love with her. She was certain that the guy was talking about Haneul. She had noticed the way he looked at her. The guy said that lately. Too many questions and thoughts were swirling in his head, and he couldn't think about anything other than that girl. He explained that he wasn't sure yet what to do, but he needed time to figure things out. Yuna, with a pained expression, asked if he was going to confess his feelings to the girl he liked. The guy looked at her with confusion. To be honest, the first thing that came to his mind was to sever all existing connections with other girls. The girl was choking on the pain of the hurt, but she held back her tears. She simply asked what he was going to do next. Was he really going to ask her to be in a relationship like an ordinary couple when he had said he wasn't planning to pursue one? He stared silently out of the window, then quietly replied that perhaps with her, he would actually want to try that. Yuna stood frozen in shock, unable to process his words. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she tried to force a smile, asking through gritted teeth why all of a sudden. Since when was one girl enough for him? Jae-hee remained silent, looking at her without saying a word. He knew he was going to hurt her, even though that was the last thing he wanted to do. Yuna raised her voice and asked why he had suddenly made such a decision, especially since he had always said that relationships weren't for him. The guy simply replied that opinions can change and there's nothing wrong with that. Then he asked why she was angry with him, since they had initially agreed that they wouldn't owe each other anything. Hearing this, the girl felt as if she had fallen from a great height. She felt a sharp pain in her chest and couldn't understand why he had treated her this way. That's why she was in a bad mood today. When Haneul returned from the storage room, she told her to go home and said she would handle closing by herself. Haneul was surprised and asked why the girl was acting so strange, wondering if she had done something wrong. But Yuna replied that everything was fine and told her to grab her friends and leave. As she left, the girl glanced at her colleague one more time and said goodbye. She was still sure that the girl was hiding something, but didn't want to pressure her. Yuna didn't even turn around and let out a heavy sigh when she heard the cafe door close and the voices of the others fade away. She tidied up and washed all the dishes. The task helped her clear her mind, if only for a moment, from the sad thoughts. Then she went outside to take out the trash, and after doing so, she headed back to the cafe. With every step, it became harder to walk, and the tears that had been building up finally overwhelmed her. She crouched down, her head falling onto her knees. Tears streamed from her eyes, and she was angry with herself. She couldn't understand why things like this kept happening to her. Suddenly, she felt someone gently drape a jacket over her shoulders. Then she heard a familiar voice, lamenting that she hadn't changed at all. She lifted her head and met Lee Yohan's gaze. He crouched down in front of her and said that she was crying again, curled up like she used to when she was a child. At the sight of him, the tears streamed down her cheeks even faster. He looked at her attentively and asked who had made her cry this time. It reminded the girl of a moment from many years ago when she had crouched down in front of a little boy and asked him the same question. Little Lee Yohan was walking home down the street when he suddenly heard someone crying. He peeked around the corner and saw his Nuna sitting on the ground. Her head bowed as she cried. The girl looked up at him with tear-filled eyes and gave him an irritated look, asking what the hell he was doing here. The boy stared back at her fearlessly. And now, many years later, Yuna sat crying in the same way, looking at him with a bewildered expression. She stood up, wiping away her tears, and said that he scared her, asking what he was doing here. She asked if he hadn't left with his friends. Lee Yohan replied that he saw she was really upset and couldn't just leave her alone like that. The girl felt embarrassed that her mood and state were so obvious. Then she pulled off his jacket and said that she didn't need his pity, handing it back to him. She said that she should have told him earlier, but she already had someone she liked. The guy calmly watched her hand holding his jacket. Yuna said that because of this, she couldn't return his feelings and asked him not to waste his time. The guy looked at her intently and asked if it was because of that person that she was crying now. He said that he was a very good listener and asked if she would like to have a drink with him and talk. The girl frowned and told him to stop fooling around, thinking he was making fun of her. She asked him why he thought she would want to share her problems with him, saying that she had plenty of friends she could meet and confide in. After a while, Yuna slammed another glass onto the table and called Jae-hee Sunbae a real bastard. The guy looked at her, a bit intimidated, and asked her to eat something so that she wouldn't feel bad later. The girl yelled at him to stop overthinking and that she was spending time with him today only because all her other friends were busy. She couldn't stop thinking about how that jerk had treated her. He decided to be condescending, as if he pitied her. She was plotting in her mind how to get back at him. She had hoped for something when he invited her to the cafe, even dressing up a little more nicely. Yuna continued to think out loud, her frustration growing. She was angry because the guy believed he was a handsome guy and acted as if he could do whatever he wanted. His preferences seemed to her like a form of perversity. Lee Yohan kept a neutral expression on his face and thought that it seemed like the girl really didn't see him as a man, considering how easily she was sharing all the details of her personal life. He then asked, if that guy was so bad, why couldn't she forget him? He then asked, if that guy was so bad, why couldn't she forget him? She knew he wasn't in love with her, but he often took care of her, and she hoped that his feelings would change over time. Even though he had warned her, she still started to have hopes, thinking she just needed a little more time. But then, suddenly, Haneul appeared. Yuna felt sad and said that she envied the girl. After all, it was clear at first glance that everyone around her loved her. Even the childhood friend the girl was in love with was clearly in love with her too. She just didn't realize it. It irritated her that Haneul got everything so easily while she always ended up losing. What annoyed her even more was that Haneul was so kind that even when she was rude to her, she still worried about her. She was genuinely sincere and caring, and that only made Yuna feel even more sick. She dropped her head onto the table and muttered that she felt sick of herself because she was jealous and envious of such a wonderful girl. Then suddenly the girl got up and said that she had talked too much. She added that if she thought about it, the guy had often listened to her complaints in the past. She admitted that she still felt very comfortable with him and could talk to him about anything, so tonight, it was her treat. Lee Johan felt embarrassed and realized that no matter how hard he tried, she still didn't see him as a man. After some time, the girl was completely drunk, and the guy was trying to persuade her to stop drinking. Yuna gave a joyless smile and admitted that she had never been anyone's first priority in her life. Family, boyfriends, friends, they had always treated her indifferently. She sat there, barely keeping her eyes open, so the guy walked up to her and said it was time for them to leave. He told her that getting this drunk was dangerous since someone with bad intentions could take advantage of her condition. Suddenly, the girl lifted her gaze to him, gently touched the tip of his nose with her finger, smiled, and said that she wasn't worried. After all, he was by her side. She knew he would never hurt her. She swayed unsteadily, so the guy crouched beside her and told her to lean on him, worried that she might get dizzy. The girl rested against his chest and murmured that he was a really good guy. She felt the warmth of his body against her cheek and suddenly confessed that she was very insecure and had always struggled with feelings of loneliness that controlled her. She had been trying to work on her self-esteem and even kept herself busy with work so that there would be no free time left. Then, suddenly, tears poured down her face, and clinging to him tighter, she confessed that despite everything, she still felt lonely every time she returned home. She constantly felt like no one needed her. The guy silently listened to her, knowing that she needed to vent, and he was ready to stay by her side for as long as she needed. Her sobs gradually subsided, and she quietly said that she needed someone, anyone, by her side, at least a friend. Suddenly, she fell silent and her breathing became steady. The guy looked at her in surprise. The girl fell asleep on his chest. He gently stroked her cheek and thought sadly to himself that he was ready to be her boyfriend, her friend, and if she allowed it, even her family. The girl fell asleep on his chest. He gently stroked her cheek and thought sadly to himself that he was ready to be her boyfriend, her friend, and if she allowed it, even her family. He was ready to be anyone for her, as long as she would finally see him. A few days passed and another person turned to alcohol to numb the feelings that were tormenting them. The guy looked at Min-cheol, who had drunk so much that he simply passed out, his head resting on the table. Meanwhile, as they had agreed, the guys finished shooting their film at Min-cheol's house. Once they were done, they celebrated. The only thing left was to edit everything, but each of them had worked hard and put in their best effort. Haneul was exhausted as she's been working on liberal arts assignments, and now she still had to clean the house after their filming. She felt so tired that she doubted she would make it back to the dormitory. She told her friends that she would stay the night since Min-cheol wouldn't be there anyway, and she could tidy up. She only asked them to call her in the morning so she wouldn't miss her classes. The friends were walking down the street, discussing when they should gather to celebrate the end of the semester. Hisu suggested meeting tomorrow after Haneul's shift, but Minji replied that they couldn't meet tomorrow because they had a scheduled alumni gathering. The girl was surprised, and Lee Johan said that he also had plans for tomorrow. This surprised her even more, and she asked what kind of plans he could have. The guy simply answered that he had a meeting scheduled. The girls knew that the guy was usually free, so they immediately suspected that he had a date and wanted to know the details. Lee Johan remained silent, suddenly recalling the events of that evening when Yuna had gotten drunk. Yuna felt warmth surrounding her, and someone's hands gently holding her. She woke up trying to understand where she was and who she was with. Finally, she realized that she was sitting with her back pressed against the guy's chest. His arm held her tightly to prevent her from falling, and he had carefully wrapped her in his jacket. She jumped in realization and stared at Lee Johan, her eyes wide with surprise. The guy stood up, stretching his legs, and said that she had finally woken up. The girl asked what had happened. He sighed heavily and began explaining that she had drunk a lot and passed out. Since the cafe had closed, they asked everyone to leave, and he felt it would be wrong to take her unconscious to a motel or his place. He noticed that she started to get cold, so he decided to wrap her up and keep her warm, waiting for her to regain consciousness. Yuna blushed and wanted to give him back his jacket, but suddenly she sneezed loudly. The guy told her that it was cold outside and it would be better for her to put it on. She said that in that case he would freeze and catch a cold. To her surprise, she felt big, warm hands gently touch her face, and she quickly looked up at the guy. He stood there, holding her face in his hands, and said that he wasn't cold, and that his hands were warm. Yuna was surprised by the feelings she experienced in that moment. The guy was so caring. Then, she suddenly shrugged off his hands and told him that he shouldn't be so kind to her. She said that she wasn't the type of person he should be putting so much effort into. The guy calmly looked at her and asked if she hated him for doing such things. Hearing this, the girl wanted to argue, but then fell silent and quietly said that it was true. She thought it would be better this way. Lee Johan thoughtfully scratched the back of his head and said that in that case, at least she could thank him for the fact that, because of her, he ended up outside at night. The girl stared at him in surprise, not understanding what kind of reward he was expecting. And now, the guy stood there, smirking to himself. He had decided that he would win her over no matter what it took. Haneul suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, not even remembering how she had fallen asleep. She reached for her phone to check the time. The screen lit up, and beside her, she noticed Min-cheol, who was standing there, staring blankly at her. In surprise, she jolted away from him as if he were a ghost. She babbled that he had scared her and asked why he had returned, since he had said he would be staying at a friend's place. The guy could only reply with a vague, yeah, and nod his head. Then, suddenly, she grabbed his face in her hands and anxiously asked how much he had drunk because he smelled strongly of alcohol. The guy silently gazed into her eyes. His gaze was unfocused, but he still continued to silently look at her. Haneul began to feel his head and said that he was totally trashed. But suddenly, Min-cheol laid his head on her lap and wrapped his arms around her waist. He mumbled that it wasn't like that at all. The boy began to shift his head, feeling the soft, warm body of the girl, inhaling her scent. She ran her hand through his hair, thinking that she had never seen him this drunk before. She took his face in her hands and looked at him anxiously, asking how he planned to attend the alumni reunion tomorrow when he would feel so terrible. She asked why he drank so much. The guy was silent for a few moments before quietly saying that she was affectionate today and that he liked it. Haneul was surprised and asked him what he meant by that. The guy didn't answer. He just took her palm in his hand and pressed his cheek against it, savoring her presence and tenderness. The girl thought to herself that it wasn't the right time to do this, as he wasn't in the right state of mind right now. Min-cheol placed his head back on her lap and thought to himself that it was becoming harder and harder to hide his feelings. But this wasn't the way he wanted to do it, especially while drunk. He wanted to confess and start a relationship with her properly. He wanted to love her to his heart's content. Haneul suddenly patted the bed and told him to lie down and sleep. But suddenly the guy became embarrassed and, with a hint of sadness, asked if they could sleep together. For a moment, the girl hesitated, but then, with a sense of readiness, agreed. Min-cheol and his friend arrived at the bar where they had agreed to meet, but to their surprise, their third friend was already there, having had quite a lot to drink. The guy was in despair because he had broken up with the girl who had previously been his best friend. The guys sat down at the table, and the guy started telling them that they had been friends since high school and later started dating. One of the friends said that they should have thought it through carefully before getting into a relationship. The guy started defending himself, saying that they had been friends for a long time and knew each other very well. He even thought he would marry her. Min-cheol listened and felt awkward, realizing how similar their situations were. He froze, staring at his friend, who was tearfully explaining that everything changed after they started dating, and that now he was left with emotional scars. Min-cheol innocently asked if they couldn't just go back to being friends. The guys looked at him like he was insane. His friend replied that if it had just been harmless flirting, they might have been able to brush it off. But after a real relationship, staying just friends was impossible. After that, the only way out was to become strangers to each other. Min-cheol thought that if that was the case, then what could be said about what was happening between him and Haneul? In the end, he got completely wasted out of sheer hopelessness. His friend approached him, looking worried, and asked if he was okay, and why he had drunk so much because it wasn't him who had been dumped by the girl. He told him not to go anywhere while he ran to grab some hangover medicine, and then they'd head home. Min-cheol lifted his head upon hearing the word home and decided that he would head to his place. After a while, upon arriving home and entering his room, Min-cheol thought that he was once again dreaming about Haneul. He thought he was still dreaming, although he couldn't remember when he had fallen asleep. In his dream, the girl was peacefully sleeping in his bed. He looked at her sleeping with sadness in his eyes, thinking about how he couldn't risk what they had between them. He decided he wouldn't take that chance. He realized he couldn't exist without her. Haneul lay still while the guy held her from behind, his arm resting gently on her waist, and his steady breathing warming the back of her neck. She couldn't fall asleep, feeling uneasy and uncomfortable. Suddenly, his arm tightened around her, pulling her closer, and he groaned softly in his sleep. She blushed, realizing that at this rate, she definitely wouldn't be able to fall asleep tonight. She was so flustered by how close their bodies were that she could feel every movement he made while he slept. Haneul almost couldn't breathe from the frustration, unable to understand how he could act like this even in his sleep. She tried to pry his hand off to free herself from his grip, but he held on to her tightly, as if unaware of what he was doing. She thought that if she tried to turn towards him, it might make her feel a bit more comfortable. But as she turned her head, she met Min-cheol's gaze, and he was staring at her intently. The guy smiled charmingly and asked why she was fidgeting. The girl blushed and shouted, asking why he had been pretending to sleep and behaving like that. He should have told her he wasn't asleep. Suddenly, the guy reached for her and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Holding her close and savoring her presence, he quietly asked her to lie still. She lifted herself slightly, their noses almost touching, and looked into his eyes. In the next moment, the smell of alcohol hit her nostrils, and she turned away in frustration, asking why he had to drink so much. The girl playfully tapped his cheek, scolding him for it, but suddenly he pressed his cheek against her palm, breathing in her scent. Haneul gently stroked him and quietly said that when he's so calm, she couldn't help but recall the past. She said that he was so sweet as a child, and she was curious how it happened that as he grew up, he changed so much. The guy slid his hands down her body and, with a playful smile, asked what was so sweet about him as a child. The girl couldn't focus while his hands roamed, and she answered in short, interrupted sentences that he followed her everywhere like a little shadow. Now, lying in his embrace, she felt so small, even though it used to be him hiding behind her back. He pulled her even closer, and she said that he wasn't this bold back in the day. A satisfied smile spread across his face. Then, she suddenly realized the position they were in and felt her heart beat faster. He gazed at her intently, and they both leaned in toward each other. Haneul breathed heavily, unable to endure any longer. She pulled away from him and told him to stop looking at her with that foggy gaze. He also was biting her like a puppy biting a dog bone. The guy pouted and said she seemed to like it. Minji was walking late in the evening when she suddenly spotted Jae-hee Sunbae at the sports field. She approached him, greeting him and asking what he was doing there so late. The guy was hanging upside down and, waving cheerfully at her, replied that he was just smoking. The girl thought it was a rather strange way to do it, especially in just a shirt in December. The guy extinguished his cigarette and asked why she was walking alone, since Haneul usually goes with her. The girl replied that they had been filming an final assignment all night and she collapsed from exhaustion. She took out an e-cigarette and the guy was surprised. He had never seen her smoke before and asked if she really did. She replied that Haneul couldn't stand the smell of cigarettes, so she tried not to smoke at university. She asked why he was lying there in the middle of the night, especially dressed like that. The guy paused for a moment, then replied that he was just thinking about this and that. Then he smiled and, looking at the girl carefully, asked what Haneul likes. Minji looked at him in surprise, not expecting such a turn in the conversation. Haneul sat on the bed, feeling embarrassed, looking at the guy in front of her. He sat in the same way, embarrassed and frustrated, as he had previously asked the girl to stop, but she stubbornly kept testing his patience. Finally, he caught her by the ankle and told her to stop teasing him. Then he grabbed the blanket and wrapped her in it like a cocoon, saying that her curiosity would get them into trouble. Min-cheol hugged her and said that it was time for them to go to sleep now. For a moment, their eyes met, and their faces were so close to each other. An invisible connection seemed to form between them as their foreheads gently touched. The guy let out a tired sigh and said that his eyes were closing and that he was already falling asleep. He said that he hoped that, for the first time in a long while, he would finally get a good night's sleep. Haneul, hearing this, grew concerned and asked why. Was he not sleeping well? What was the reason? The guy sleepily mumbled that it was because she constantly appeared in his dreams. The girl was surprised and sat up slightly, asking if it was really her he saw in his dreams and how often it happened. The boy was already nearly asleep, so his mind wasn't fully in control of what he was saying. He confessed that lately, she had been appearing in his dreams almost every night. Hearing this, the girl broke into a contented smile, sensing what it meant. She asked why this was happening to him, wondering if he really liked her that much. Min-cheol sleepily replied that he really liked her. The girl couldn't believe it, wondering if she was dreaming. Could it really be that lucky? That her feelings were truly mutual? For a few moments, she just sat there, staring at the sleeping guy, processing what she had just heard. Then she blushed with a mix of embarrassment and joy. Happiness overwhelmed her, and she felt like screaming at the top of her lungs. She couldn't sit still, jumping around the bed in disbelief, unable to accept that all of this was real. Then, finally overwhelmed with joy, she loudly declared that she liked him too. But in response, the guy merely snored softly and shifted his head. Frustrated, she shouted at him to wake up. She started pushing and pinching him, hoping he'd snap out of it, but the guy remained completely unaware. She climbed on top of him and began shaking him, saying that they needed to start dating. The girl saw that he was so drunk and tired that nothing would wake him up right now, and she was shaking with the desire to confess to him and become an official couple as soon as possible. Finally, morning arrived. Haneul hadn't closed her eyes all night, continuing to watch the guy. She sat by his bed, waiting for the moment he would wake up. She planned to confess to him as soon as he opened his eyes. And although she had initially planned to buy him a gift before confessing, now that she was certain their feelings were mutual, none of that mattered anymore. She just wanted to start dating him as soon as possible. But why wasn't he waking up? She even started poking and pinching him again, but he just squirmed and furrowed his brow in his sleep. Haneul was getting anxious as she had to leave for her part-time job soon, but she desperately wanted to confess to him as soon as he woke up. Suddenly, Haneul's phone rang. It was Minji, and she remembered that she had asked her to wake her up in the morning. She had no choice. She couldn't skip her part-time job or university. Soon, the girl got dressed, hesitating about what to do. In the end, she decided to go about her business and give Min-cheol some time to sleep. The front door quietly slammed, and the guy opened his eyes, thinking he had imagined it. The girl was already at work, nervously biting her nails. Yuna watched her quietly for a while. She could tell that something was troubling the girl. Yuna thought that the girl looked like a little lost puppy searching for its owner. She couldn't help but ask why Haneul decided to work that morning. Did she have plans for the evening? The girl replied happily that it was true and that she had a reunion scheduled. Yuna suddenly lowered her gaze and apologized. Surprised, Haneul asked why she was apologizing. Yuna looked up at Haneul, her expression softening, and said that she had been harsh with her last time. Haneul, remembering that evening, replied that Yuna seemed really upset and down, asking if there was anything she could do to help. Then she said that if the girl wasn't ready to share, it was fine. She just hoped that everything was okay with her now. Hearing this, Yuna was surprised and froze, not knowing what to say. She suddenly asked why the girl cared so much about her after she had treated her so badly. Haneul smiled and replied that she understood everyone goes through a tough time, so she wasn't upset with her. Then she suddenly hugged Yuna and said that she was so happy that she decided to apologize. She added that it was really nice of her and that she was such a sweetheart. Yuna blushed with embarrassment. She wasn't used to someone expressing their emotions so openly. Meanwhile, the girl kept hugging her and said that she reminded her of a little kitten. When she finally let go, Yuna asked if her good mood was because of the reunion. She had noticed that Haneul was practically glowing with happiness today. Then Haneul flashed a conspiratorial smile and motioned for Yuna to come closer. She leaned in closer, and Haneul whispered in her ear that it seemed like she would soon start dating her best friend, the one she liked and had told her about before. Yuna asked if it was really true. The girl nodded excitedly and said it was so hard to contain her emotions. The girl replied that she was very happy for her and thought that she looked like a little adorable puppy. She was genuinely happy for Haneul. Later in the evening, Haneul and Minji arrived at the cafe where their class reunion was taking place. There were lots of people around, and the girls scanned the room looking for their table. Finally, they were greeted by Hojong, the former class president, who cheerfully greeted them. The girls excitedly discussed how long it had been since they last saw each other and how much had changed since their last meeting. At the table, some of their classmates were already sitting. Suddenly, someone asked if Min-cheol would be coming. The girl checked her phone, but the guy still hadn't responded to her messages. Minji speculated that he probably wouldn't come because he had drunk a lot yesterday. Haneul sighed heavily and said that it was probably true. She grumbled about how he didn't know his limits and kept drinking for no reason. But suddenly, a male silhouette appeared behind her. Min-cheol ruffled her hair and said that it wasn't for her to judge him, as if she had forgotten how she used to get drunk herself. At the sight of him, the girl's breath caught. Her heart pounded wildly, and joy overwhelmed her. Everyone around them started to eye the guy, commenting on how much he had changed, how he had become such a handsome guy, and how he resembled an idol. Suddenly, a girl smiled and suggested that Haneul sit next to her. Haneul thanked her and, sitting opposite with Minji, tried to focus but couldn't remember the girl's name. The girl noticed her confusion and, smiling, reminded her that her name was Yoon So-hee. Then Haneul clapped her hands and said that now she remembered her. She mentioned that since the girl had changed her hair color and done her makeup, she didn't recognize her right away. Meanwhile, Min-cheol sat with a stoic expression on his face, still not remembering who she was. The evening went on, with everyone sitting and chatting about their school days. Many people kept glancing curiously at Min-cheol and Haneul, their attention clearly drawn to the two of them. Min-cheol sat, feeling annoyed by all the attention, while Haneul, filled with anticipation, wondered when the right moment would come to confess her feelings to him. She was eager to do it as soon as possible. Suddenly, a group of former classmates gathered around the guy, complimenting his hairstyle and saying that the hair color really suited him. Ho-jung raised her glass and proposed a toast to everyone in celebration of their reunion. The guy smirked and leaned toward Haneul, asking if she had heard what the others said. She looked at him in confusion and asked what he was talking about. The light strands of his bangs fell over his smiling eyes. The guy said smugly that everyone had commented on how well the hairstyle suited him. Haneul asked, "So what?" The guy, irritated, replied that she had called him an old man and laughed at him when he dyed his hair. He was curious if she had changed her mind now. Though inside she was screaming that he looked incredibly attractive, she simply smirked and replied that she hadn't changed her opinion at all. While the young people were playfully arguing, they didn't even notice that Yoon So-hee had been watching them the whole time, throwing strange looks in their direction. Haneul began to carefully study the menu. Minji asked if everything was okay. Haneul replied that she was craving something refreshing but couldn't find anything similar on the menu. She asked Ho-jung if it was allowed to bring their own food to the establishment, and the girl replied that it was. Then the girl excitedly raised her hand to get everyone's attention and asked who wanted ice cream. Having counted the number of people who wanted ice cream, she stood up and said she would go to the store. As soon as she walked away, Min-cheol silently stood up and followed her. For a few moments, everyone present silently watched as they left, and as soon as they were out of sight, they all started bombarding Minji with questions about whether those two were dating and what was going on between them. The girl tried to calm everyone down, saying that she didn't know anything, especially since those two had been close since childhood and still spent a lot of time together. Then the friends concluded that it was probably just their imagination since they hadn't seen them in a while. They remembered that in school, those two were always together as well. Only Yoon So-hee suddenly spoke up and said that she remembered it wasn't always like that. She mentioned that she remembered something happening during their first year, which caused them to almost stop talking to each other. Meanwhile, Haneul came out of the store with bags full of ice cream, and Min-cheol offered to carry them for her. She tried to refuse, but Min-cheol took the bags from her hands and playfully tapped a soda can against her forehead, telling her to drink it instead. She asked why, every time she drank alcohol, he would give her soda instead of the drinks that help with a hangover. Min-cheol replied that he knew she didn't like the taste of those drinks, and the girl blushed, realizing how much he cared for her. Opening the can, the girl took a sip and thought that maybe now was the right time to confess to him. She called his name and he looked at her attentively. The girl's face turned red as she recalled the events of the previous night, and she tried to ask if he remembered what had happened. The guy looked at her in confusion, watching her struggle to form a sentence. Suddenly, Yoon So-hee appeared next to them and said that they had been gone for so long that she decided to come looking for them. Startled, Haneul jumped and dropped the can of soda, spilling a little on her hands. Yoon So-hee suggested that Haneul could go to the nearby restroom to wash her hands. The girl said that they could go ahead and she would catch up with them later. Min-cheol teased her, saying not to fall asleep in the bathroom, and smirked. His cheerfulness instantly faded when he noticed the strange look Yoon So-hee was giving him, and he asked if she wanted to say something to him. The girl gave a strange smile and asked if he was dating Haneul. The guy rolled his eyes and said he was tired of such questions, and that they weren't dating. But then he froze when he heard the girl say that it was right, because it would be too shameless for him to start dating her. He stared at her in surprise. Yoon So-hee smirked and said that in the past he had made the girl suffer so much that it would be almost laughable if they started dating now. Her words dripped with venom. Meanwhile, Haneul, unaware of what was happening, approached the sink and discovered that the sticky drink had seeped under the sleeves of her jacket. Min-cheol irritably asked the girl what the heck she was talking about. Yoon So-hee acted carefree and told him not to pretend like he didn't understand. She pointed at him with her finger and said that he was the one responsible for what happened to Haneul's left wrist. Meanwhile, the girl took off her wristband to wash her hands, revealing a large, elongated scar on her left wrist, and she gazed at it with a sense of sadness. The girl's wristband got wet, and she decided that she didn't want to put it back on. She put the ad in her pocket, deciding that with the long sleeves of her jacket, the scar wouldn't be visible anyway. Meanwhile, an angry Min-cheol asked the girl who the hell she thought she was. Yoon So-hee continued to act innocent and asked if he was really just going to change the subject. She smirked and asked if he really thought that he and Haneul were the only people on the planet. There were others around them, including people in that hospital. While the guy stood there in confusion, it seemed like the girl was enjoying it. Smiling, she asked if he really thought that if he kept his mouth shut, everything would be as if nothing had happened. She never imagined he could be so shameless. A lump rose in Min-cheol's throat, and he couldn't say a word. The girl clasped her hands together and with a sweet smile said that she understood him to some extent. She said that Haneul was truly a wonderful person. She was kind, bright, and honest. Anyone who was around her would feel like a better person just by being in her presence. Yoon So-hee shifted her gaze to the guy with a sly look and said that, however, he was not a good person at all. Min-cheol froze again, a chill running down his spine. Memories unwelcome flooded his mind. The dark, empty hospital corridors and the girl lying in the ward, curled up in a ball, gasping for breath from her sobs. Yoon So-hee continued to smile innocently, as if telling him some silly joke, but her words stung him. She said that she was actually surprised how they had managed to stay friends all this time. The guy visibly grew angry and tensed up. She had no idea what she was talking about, so he told her to shut her mouth and think about what she was saying before speaking. But it seemed like the girl was enjoying the pain she was causing him. She just kept smiling and said that Haneul was probably so kind that even when she saw his true nature, the cowardly and pathetic Min-cheol, she still wouldn't be disappointed. Then she smiled cheerfully and said that the girl would definitely fall for him. She wished him good luck and said she would be rooting for him. Min-cheol clenched his jaw tightly. Suddenly, Haneul appeared beside them and, surprised, asked if they had stayed to wait for her. Yoon So-hee immediately turned to Haneul and replied that they decided to wait for her, asking if they could return to the cafe now. Haneul glanced at Min-cheol and told Yoon So-hee that she needed to talk to him privately, asking her to return to the cafe alone. Yoon So-hee didn't want to, but since she had already done what she came for, she decided to leave. The young people watched in silence as Yoon So-hee walked away. Neither Haneul nor Min-cheol spoke, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Finally, the girl lifted her gaze to him. His eyes were empty, as if all the life and joy had been drained from him. They stepped aside, and the girl looked around before asking if he remembered what happened the night before. Min-cheol tried to compose himself and act as usual. He said that if she was planning to scold him and be upset because he drank and didn't respond to her messages, it would be childish. The girl realized that he didn't remember, but it didn't matter because she remembered what he had told her. She said that it wasn't about that at all. She was so nervous that she couldn't put two words together. Mentally, confessing to him was so easy, but now, standing in front of him and looking into his eyes, it didn't seem so simple. She trembled and, stuttering, could only utter fragmented sounds. At one point, shifting from one foot to the other, she stumbled and felt herself losing balance. The girl began to fall, gasping for air in surprise. But in the next moment, Min-cheol wrapped his arm around her waist and caught her as if she weighed nothing. Annoyed, he said that he kept telling her to watch where she was going. Haneul felt how firmly he was holding her, looked into his eyes and got lost in them, wondering just how beautiful they really were. Her heart was beating so loudly against her ribs that it seemed the guy might feel its rhythm against his chest. Then, Haneul leaned forward. She hugged him tightly, pressing her cheek against his chest, trying to breathe as deeply as she could. Min-cheol was embarrassed and surprised at such an outburst and asked what she was doing, asking if she had already gotten drunk. Haneul hugged him tighter and, lifting her head, looked at him, confessing that she liked him a lot. The noise in her ears was deafening. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to leap out of her chest, and her eyes were burning with emotion as she repeatedly whispered that she liked him. Hearing the confession he had secretly dreamed of for so long, Min-cheol froze. He had always known his place and had never dared to hope for anything more. He hadn't expected to hear such a confession from her, so it left him in shock. Seeing the pained expression on his face, the girl was taken aback. She had expected a different reaction to her confession. The guy took her hands and gently pushed her away without saying a word. The girl didn't understand if she had done something wrong. She anxiously asked what had happened, but he interrupted her and quietly asked, "Why?" He asked why she said that she liked him. He told her that she was probably just confused. Haneul didn't understand why he was saying that. She had mustered the courage to confess, and yet he reacted like this. Min-cheol interrupted her again and said that he wasn't planning to date her. While Haneul stared at him in shock, Min-cheol turned away, muttering that he simply couldn't do it. She couldn't understand what he was muttering. Trying to look into his eyes, she kept asking what was wrong with him. She grew seriously worried, grabbing onto his t-shirt and pleading with him not to shut her out. She asked if he was really that shocked by her confession. She caught his gaze and shouted that she knew he liked her too. Min-cheol looked at her in shock and fear, while the girl firmly stated that he had admitted it to her himself last night. Then she shouted that, besides everything else, if he didn't like her, they wouldn't have done what they did. The boy immediately covered her mouth with his hand, yelling that they were outside and that she should think about what she was saying and where she was saying it. Min-cheol clenched his jaw, his entire body tense as he listened to her words. Haneul, determined and relentless, pushed his hand away and continued arguing. She insisted that even if they had initially pretended it meant nothing, the fact that they couldn't stop proved that there were feelings involved. Haneul took a deep breath, her eyes burning with determination. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly how she felt. Min-cheol remained silent, his expression conflicted, as if battling a war within himself. The girl refused to back down. Her eyes were locked onto Min-cheol, demanding an answer. She asked if he liked her, and if not, why they had done all of this. Time seemed to slow, and Haneul could feel every nerve in her body taut. Suddenly, the guy asked if she hadn't said at the very beginning that it was just simple curiosity. Min-cheol inhaled sharply, his fists clenching at his sides. He stood there, silent, tense, and unable to meet her gaze. Then he turned away from her, preparing to leave. The girl reached out her hand toward him. Min-cheol thought to himself that this was the worst thing he could have done. Because of his cowardice, he felt pathetic. Haneul grabbed his hand and asked him to wait. The guy turned around, looking at her with empty eyes. He turned around and met her gaze filled with despair. Then his gaze drifted to the scar on her wrist, and he thought to himself that he was awful, only capable of leaving her with lasting wounds. He knew he had to end everything right now, before it was too late. Anger at himself surged within him, and he forcefully pulled his hand away from Haneul. The girl flinched, and fear flashed in her eyes. Seeing the way she looked at him, the guy flinched as well, not expecting such a reaction. Once again, he was reminded that he was simply a terrible person, and with a disappointed sigh, he turned away. He slowly walked away, leaving the bewildered Haneul behind him, and quietly said for her to just stop. Minji noticed that her friend returned alone and asked where she had been for so long and where Min-cheol was. The girl sat down, forcing a smile, and said that he had urgent matters to attend to, so he left earlier. The female part of the group sighed in disappointment. Minji was surprised and asked what had distracted him so urgently that he left in such cold weather without his jacket. Haneul didn't know what to come up with and responded vaguely. The girl looked closely at her friend. She could tell that Haneul was confused and upset, but decided not to focus on it in front of everyone at that moment. Haneul decided to push her worries aside, thinking that she'd talk to Min-cheol tomorrow at university. She felt confident that things between them would improve. Yoon So-hee sat nearby, observing the girl's state, and she realized that everything had gone exactly as she had planned. A smug smile spread across her face. The next day, Haneul paced back and forth in front of Min-cheol's faculty, waiting for him to finally come out. Finally, Min-cheol appeared, and Haneul excitedly ran towards him, calling his name. She smiled brightly and asked if he got home safely yesterday. Haneul tried to act casually, hoping to keep things light, but to her surprise, he simply walked past her in silence, as if she didn't exist at all. In that moment, her heart skipped a beat. She quickly turned around and stared at his retreating back, unable to believe that this was really happening. The girl continued to watch him, and for the first time in her life, a thought crossed her mind. What if this was it, and they would never see each other again? She knew that such things could happen when one friend confessed to another, but this was them. It couldn't happen to them, because she was certain that he liked her too. So why was he avoiding her? She wanted to catch up to him and ask why he was acting this way, but her feet felt as though they were glued to the ground. She knew she couldn't turn back time or change anything, but she was terrified that things might only get worse. Haneul was afraid that he would turn away from her again, and she would have to see the same expression on his face as yesterday. She didn't understand what the hell was happening. At that moment, Jae-hee Sunbae was walking nearby, smiling as he said goodbye to his acquaintances. Suddenly, he spotted Haneul and, waving at her cheerfully, called her name, trying to get her attention. But then he froze. She stood there, staring blankly into the distance, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her eyes were so lifeless, as if she was ready to fall apart into pieces right then and there. The smile on the guy's face faded, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. The girl continued to stand there, silently crying, alone in the middle of the street. The guy felt a sharp pain in his chest, a strong urge to hold her and protect her from the world, even though he didn't know why she was crying. These feelings were new to him. As Min-cheol silently distanced himself from Haneul step by step, Jae Hee-sunbae confidently walked toward the girl, whose heart lay in shattered pieces at her feet. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story and which manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next one.